William. Not just any coaching inn was fit to house His Grace the Duke of Rockwood's distinguished person. The Duke, until recently simply known as Mr. William York, had that on the authority of his man of business, who sat across from him in the travelling chaise. "Is the coach and lantern suitable?" William struggled to keep the exhaustion from his voice as they came upon another inn on the road to his country seat in the south of Kent. Edmund Cartwright smiled at him. "It will do well enough for tonight, Your Grace." His blue eyes twinkled in the increasingly dim light. Flitting to the signet ring, William was pulling on and off his finger distractedly. It still sat heavy on his previously ringless hand. William had met Edmund years ago at Oxford, and they had become fast friends. Edmund had gone on to become a barrister, and later the steward to an earl. It was to Edmund that William's mind had immediately gone when he had begun to think who to trust as his adviser and man of business. Had it been left to William, though, he would have stopped 3 miles ago at the Nag's Head. He had spent the night there before, after all, but he had not been a duke then. Nor, to be fair, had he ever truly anticipated being one. The carriage accident that had befallen his father's cousin, and both of the man's sons 2 months ago, had been as tragic as it had been unexpected, and every moment since had been filled with the endless list of tasks required of a new, and woefully untrained, duke. William had no desire to do anything unbefitting his new position by spending the night at an unsuitable inn, however, so the chaise came to a stop in front of the half-timbered building. A freshly painted sign with "The Coach and Lantern" in yellow letters hung over the door. The people in the road whispered and pointed at the Rockwood crest emblazoned on the chaise, craning their necks to peer through the window for a glimpse of William. Had father been alive, it would have made him puff his chest with pride and satisfaction. He had always put great stock in their close relation to the late Duke of Rockwood, even though the families had never been on good terms. "Greatness runs in your veins, William," father had always said. As for William, the gawking made him sigh softly, for tonight he was simply tired. First, there had been the late Duke's funeral, a dashed, uncomfortable affair. How was one to look sufficiently grave regarding the untimely death of relatives one had hardly ever spoken to, particularly whilst everyone around believed you to be secretly celebrating those deaths? Following the funeral, there had been a petition to the Lord Chancellor, familial records searched out and provided, the writ of summons, homage fees paid, and finally the seating ceremony. Now that it was all done, and Parliament dissolved for the year, William wanted nothing more than to sleep for 3 days. The chaise door was opened by a stable boy, who stood rigidly at its side. His eyes darted away again and again while William stepped down to the cobblestones. William tried to maintain the confident bearing expected of someone in his position, but he could not dismiss a flickering concern that the stable boy's shifty gaze had something to do with him. His eyes roved, insistent on reassuring himself there was nothing he was doing to inadvertently humiliate the dukedom. His gaze halted on the servant holding the horses' heads. It was not an ostler, but a woman. She was not much younger than William's 31 years and wore a grey dress, an apron, and a white cap over her head. A few locks of gold hair escaped from what looked to have once been a neat coiffure. Her cheeks bore evidence of work involving a fire grate, as did her apron. What on earth was she doing holding the horses' heads? At his prolonged pause on the chaise steps, the woman's gaze flitted to William, holding his eye for a brief moment before darting away again. That was one thing he had noted since inheriting the dukedom. People rarely met his eye now, as though he were Medusa and they feared he would turn them to stone. A servant fetched their belongings, and Edmund led the way to the door, stopping on the threshold. "I will speak with the innkeeper," he said. William nodded and stood erect inside the doorway while he waited. It sat strangely with him to allow someone else to handle such easy matters. It was what his consequence now demanded, but it made him feel inept rather than important. He hoped that would change with time. He pulled off his signet ring and stared at the crest and jewels surrounding it, trying not to heed the conversation Edmund was having with the flushed innkeeper. "Of course, sir," the man said with a bow. "We are positively elated to welcome His Grace to the coach and lantern." "Thank you. His Grace desires a bit of privacy this evening." Of course. I can have all the guests escorted out of the inn within 10 minutes. He may choose whichever bed he desires." William and Edmund caught eyes, and Edmund cleared his throat, a little twitch at the corner of his mouth the only thing to betray his amusement. "That will not be necessary. A private parlour and a dry, comfortable bed will suffice." William was soon shepherded into a private parlour by the innkeeper, who insisted Edmund himself choose which 2 rooms were allotted to them. Edmund agreed, and the parlour door closed, leaving William alone. He took a seat on the sofa and blew a burst of air through his lips. Stretching out his legs, he let his head drape against the sofa back and rubbed at his eyes, grateful to have a blissful moment alone. He was deeply thankful for and appreciative of Edmund, but even in his friend's presence, he felt the need to act and behave in a manner befitting a duke. Frankly, it was exhausting. The relaxed posture was heavenly after the pomp and scrutiny of the last few weeks, and he tugged at his cravat for good measure, closing his eyes in satisfaction as it loosened its hold on his neck. Edmund would allow him that indulgence, at least, while they were in the privacy of this parlour. His friend was not a tyrant, after all. The door opened, and William nearly groaned. I know. Only grant me 30 more seconds of this felicity, and I will recite the entire peerage to you as penance." A throat was gently cleared, and William opened one eye, for he would recognise Edmund's throat clearing anywhere, and that was not it. The woman from outside stood in the doorway, her eyes averted from his uncivilised posture. He scrambled to take a more proper seat. "Forgive me, Your Grace?" Her demeanour was composed, her gaze politely trained on the floor, but one corner of her mouth betrayed a hint of amusement for an instant. "I only came to return this to you." She held out a hand, unfurling her fingers to reveal his signet ring. William's gaze shot to his left pinky, which was entirely bare, then back to the maid's palm and the gold ring upon it. He must have dropped it in the entry. Did this maid realise the value of what she held? Aside from its obvious financial worth, it might easily be used for forgery or blackmail. His stomach roiled at the thought. That was all he needed, a scandal when he was trying to prove himself to his fellow peers. Deeply unsettled, he strode over and took the ring. His eyes flitted to the maid, but her gaze remained lowered, making it impossible for him to properly see her. "Thank you," he said with feeling. "It is not every servant who would show such integrity." Her gaze flew to his, an almost stricken look in her eyes. They were a striking blue, their clarity setting them at odds with her smudged cheeks and clothing, and a foreign sensation rippled through him as their gazes met. William frowned, wondering what he could possibly have said to elicit such a reaction, but her gaze dropped swiftly away. William set the ring snugly on his pinky. "Please tell me how I can repay this service." Those blue eyes darted to him once again, searching his for an instant, as though she was considering his offer. "There is no need, Your Grace." Her manner of speech brought his brows together, for it was not what he would expect of a maid at a country inn. There was no coarseness. Indeed, it was almost refined, one might say. "I bid you good evening." She curtsied deeply in her ash-covered apron, then left the room swiftly. Once the door closed, He sighed with relief and returned the ring to its place. Edmund needn't know of his blunder. If William couldn't keep track of a signet ring, how would anyone have confidence in his ability to manage a dukedom? Chapter 2. Clara. Clara Quinn shut the door of the private parlour behind her, her heart rapping a quick rhythm against her chest as she held the doorknob behind her back. She had nearly asked the Duke to help her when he had offered repayment for her service. He had seemed so genuine in his gratitude. He had kind eyes, too, and it had been some time since she had known kindness from a man. But he was a duke, and a simple maid did not ask for anything at all from such a figure. Men of substance took and gave as it served them. Her current situation attested to that fact. Besides, what would the Duke of Rockwood think if he knew she had considered keeping the ring? It could have been the solution to most of her problems, of which there were many. It could have provided her with not just money, but perhaps a means of clearing her name, a letter attesting to her innocence, signed with the Duke's seal. Who would doubt such a thing? But using a stolen ring to exonerate herself from the accusation of past theft, the irony was undeniable. She had already been branded a thief, though. She might as well obtain something valuable to continue deserving the name. And yet, she had not been able to bring herself to keep the ring. Her father's words had inevitably come to her. "The world be an unforgiving place, Clara, but with hard work and a kind heart, you're bound to come out all right." She only wished she had lived up to his words better. The man who had accompanied the Duke appeared at the base of the staircase, followed by the innkeeper, Mr. Trumbull, and Clara hurried away from the door. She kept her head low as she made her way to the kitchens, trying to remain as inconspicuous as possible. She had little hope her husband had returned, but if he had, the kitchens would be his destination. He was always famished after days of drinking. "Clara!" Mr. Trumbull's voice brought her up short in the corridor, and she shut her eyes for a moment before facing him. "What were you doing near that parlour?" "The Duke dropped something," she said. "I merely returned it to him." Mr. Trumbull's lips pressed into a thin, displeased line. "You should have given it to me. You have no business so much as looking at the Duke of Rockwood." She gave a curt nod, grateful he didn't know that she had looked at the Duke a number of times and met his eye more than once. "You were otherwise engaged, sir, and I thought the Duke would wish for his property to be returned to him without delay." Mr. Trumbull looked unconvinced, but Clara was no fool. He was annoyed he was not the one afforded the opportunity to render the Duke a service. "Is your husband recovered?" he asked. "Unfortunately not." When John had not returned for his duties 2 days ago, she had told the innkeeper he was ill. It was not entirely untrue, for only a man who was unwell had the insatiable appetite for drink and gambling her husband did. "But I assure you both of our duties will be carried out to your satisfaction, sir." "And yet, Clara, it is not satisfying to me, or to anyone who witnesses it, much less a duke, to have a dirty maid carrying out the duties of an ostler." The description of her state made her blush furiously. She was still not accustomed to the grime that found its way onto her person over the course of her long, busy days at the inn, and there were few mirrors to inform her of the fact. She had always taken pride in her neat appearance as Lady Redgrave's personal maid, and in her mind's eye she was still that person, someone in whom her mistress could take pride. A quick look at her soot-covered apron was enough to remind her how low she had fallen since then. "I understand, sir," she said. "I am confident John will return to his duties shortly." "He had better, or I will have no choice but to dismiss both of you." With a clenched jaw and a quick curtsy, she made her way to the servants' quarters to clean up. She was not angry with Mr. Trumbull. In fact, she sympathised with him. To have his new ostler disappear for days at a time was not something most innkeepers would tolerate. If Clara, also new to her position, had not been there to plead her husband's case and shoulder his responsibilities as well as her own, he would have had no position to return to. But she was exhausted. In the 3 weeks since their wedding, she had seen precious little of her so-called husband. He had immediately set to spending her hard-earned money, now his money, on gambling and drinking. The money he knew of, at least. A quiver of uncertainty shook her as she brushed at the soot on her apron. It had been nearly a week since she had looked in the hiding spot. She laid aside the rag she was using and rushed to their bed, a bed they had shared but one night since their wedding. On the rare night when John returned for sleep, she had moved to the floor. She ran her hand along the stones on the wall until she felt the familiar one that jutted out slightly. Hooking her fingers on the top, she wriggled it out and set the rock on the bed. She had felt guilty for keeping this money a secret from John, for when she had hidden it, she had not known she was marrying a man given over to becoming intoxicated or losing money. Dismissed from her prior position without a character or reference, she had been desperate for someone who could offer a stable future. With his quiet demeanour, his promises to care for her, and his offer to help her find work, John had seemed just that when she had sat beside him on the mail coach. For weeks she had been seeking work, experiencing rejection after rejection, doing everything she could to preserve her savings. Meeting John had been her first glimmer of hope. He had helped her find a roof over her head and, days later, a position at the Coach and Lantern. They had been married 2 days after. If only she had known she had met and married him during the short period when he had been abstaining from his vices. That abstention had lasted until the festivities the night of the wedding, when his refusals of drink had been stubbornly overridden by friends. 3 weeks later, Clara hardly recognized the man she had married. Neither did she have much opportunity to, for he had been gone whenever he was not required at the inn, and when he was required as well. Thus it had been mere instinct, blessed instinct, that had led her to keep the existence of this money to herself. She reached her hand into the hole and grasped the silk of the reticule hidden within. Her heart skidded to a halt. There was no jangling of coins, no weight to the bag beyond its worn fabric. It was limp, empty. Every last pence was gone. Clara took the bridle of the horse and pulled it away from the trough full of feed. "Come," she urged, pulling more insistently as the horse resisted. "Your master is waiting." The horse finally surrendered, and she led it out of the stable and toward the cart waiting in the yard. She wiped her brow with the back of her hand. It was still morning, but she had already been awake for many hours, and the cloudless sky meant the July sun beat down without mercy. Once the horse was attached to the cart, the driver handed her 2 copper coins. "Thank you, sir," she said humbly. As the cart drove away from the inn, she looked at the dirty coins in her hand and sighed. They were the only money she had. With a quick glance around, she reached into the pocket beneath her apron and pulled out a pocket watch and its accompanying chain. She stared at it until her eyes began to burn and she was forced to blink. If she sold it, she could fetch £15. That would be enough to buy her a place on the mail coach and keep her afloat until she could find work elsewhere. She wouldn't survive much more of things as they stood, fulfilling the duties of 2 people while her husband gambled and drank away their earnings. She was working hard, just as Papa had taught her, and she was trying to be kind to John. When would things come out all right? A movement in the road caught her eye, and she glanced up. Her eyes widened as John stumbled toward the yard, the flat-brimmed hat askew on his head. He was flanked on either side by 2 men she recognized as Thomas and Samuel. They were the ones who had insisted John share a drink with them on their wedding night. With a quick look around to ensure Mr. Trumbull was nowhere in sight, She hurried toward John. If the lumbering movements and loud laughter of Thomas and Samuel hadn't been enough to tell her what state the three of them were in, the stench would have. If Mr. Trumbull saw John like this, her stories of his illness would crumble, and both of them would be dismissed. She forced down a desire to retch and took John by the arm, guiding him to the side of the road where the bushes would block them from view. Thomas and Samuel followed like unwanted shadows. John grinned at Clara like a fool. "There you are," he said, as though she was the one who had disappeared for 3 days. Thomas surveyed Clara from head to toe as his own head swayed slightly. "She'll fetch a pretty penny, I'd say." "John," Clara said, ignoring Thomas and holding John's arm more firmly to force his attention to her. "Where is the money?" His good humour faltered, and a little crease appeared between his brows, as though he was hurt. "The money ye hid from me?" "Yes." She was too anxious for an answer to bother justifying what she had done, though she certainly could have. Not to a drunkard, however. Samuel shook his head and made a tisking sound, pulling a flask from his pocket. "Shouldn't have done that. 'Twasn't your money any more." "Where is it?" Clara repeated. "Gone," John said. Clara's hand dropped from his arm, and she stared at him, looking for any sign he might be having a laugh at her expense. But he wasn't laughing. In fact, his brows were pinched, as though the answer saddened him. "Oh, all of it?" she asked, her voice weak. There had been £35 in that reticule. "Every last pence." Samuel sighed softly as he put a sympathetic arm around John's shoulders. His finger shot into the air. "But we have a plan, don't we, John?" Clara couldn't speak. She felt so ill. She covered her face with her hands. She had scrimped and saved for years for that money. How could it simply be gone, with nothing at all to show for it? "We do," John said. "We'll get it back. And another 3 pints of grog besides," Thomas added, taking the flask from Samuel. He tipped back his head, shook the upturned flask, and the last few drops trickled into his mouth. Clara turned away and squeezed her eyes shut, wishing she could wake from this nightmare, that she could return to those idyllic 2 years before Lady Redgrave had married and everything had gone so terribly awry. It was only 2 months since she had been dismissed, but it felt like 2 years. "'Tis market day," Thomas reasoned. "That be in our favour. People'll be ready to spend the blunt." "Aye," Samuel concurred. "And she be a fine talker, John." Thomas grunted his agreement. "Mayhap we should see she's cleaned up before we take her. She'll fetch us more that way." "Us?" John said. "She's my wife. What she fetches be mine." Their words began to filter through Clara's harried thoughts, and she turned toward them. "What are you talking about?" "Don't fear, Clara," John reassured her. "I'll buy ye back as soon as can be." "What?" Her frustration shifted to wariness. "What do you mean?" "He's selling ye, wench," Samuel said with a large grin. The breath in Clara's lungs vanished as she looked to John, her eyes wide. But the man she had married was not to be found in the vacant expression he wore. "Selling me?" she repeated. She had heard of the practice of men selling wives. Everyone had, but she had never witnessed it herself. From her limited knowledge, the sale was usually done with the mutual agreement of the wife, and the purchaser was most often the man she had been carrying on with in private. None of those were the case for her. She had no desire to be married to John, but there was a serious possibility that whoever she was sold to would be far worse than he. John, though addicted to drink and gaming, was not the type to lay a hand on her. And yet, The burdens he had promised to share had not been shared. They had been multiplied. "I'd buy you myself if I had the money," Thomas said. "I've always fancied a wife to warm me bed." "Come on then," Samuel said, taking hold of Clara's arm. "To the square we go." Clara hesitated a moment, then wrenched her arm away from him and ran. Chapter 3. William. Edmund opened the door, and William strode out of the coach and lantern, pulling on his travelling gloves. It required concentration, for the gloves had not been made with his signet ring in mind. "Where is the carriage?" Edmund asked. "If we do not hurry, we shall be caught in the rain." The front of the inn afforded a view toward the market cross, around which various stalls were set up for merchants to sell their wares. The travelling chaise was nowhere to be seen, however, despite Edmund ordering it to be brought around a full 20 minutes ago. "My deepest, most regretful apologies, Your Grace," the innkeeper said, hurrying up to him and executing a sequence of obsequious bows William found deeply embarrassing. "Our ostler has fallen ill, which has sent things into a bit of chaos." "Hence the maid at the horses' heads last night," William said, as much to himself as to anyone else. The innkeeper nodded. "Highly unusual, I know, and I hope we have not given offence. I assure you I spoke to her firmly when I discovered she'd had the audacity to enter your private parlour, Your Grace." William cleared his throat, avoiding Edmund's eye. "She was returning something to me. She should be rewarded, not scolded for her pains. I hope you will see to it that she receives this." He handed the man a small sack of coins. "Of course," the innkeeper said meekly. "Unfortunately, she seems to have disappeared, which explains the delay in your carriage being brought around. Perhaps she too has become ill. In any case, I came to inform you that your horses are being prepared, Your Grace." William gave a nod, and the innkeeper bowed himself away. Edmund looked at William with a frown. What did he mean? His words stopped at the sound of men's voices nearby. William turned toward them and went still. 3 men pulled the maid from last night toward the square. She held her head high, but there was a gash on her cheek, and her hands were bound in front of her with thin rope. Around her neck was a horse's halter, which was held by the tallest of the 3 men. "What the devil?" William said. His words brought the maid's head around, and their gazes met for a brief moment. His heart skipped at the sight of those blue eyes. The pride and humiliation warring within them before she looked away pricked him to the core. A young boy came dashing out of the inn yard, and William seized his arm. "What are they doing, boy?" He looked up at William, as though the question was the height of stupidity. "Selling her, my lord." He broke free and continued his progress toward the market square, where the maid and her entourage were beginning to attract attention and a crowd. Edmund's gaze met William's, the same shock reflected there. "Surely he must be mistaken," Edmund said. William's brows drew together. "There is nothing sure about it." He strode in the direction of the gathering audience. "Your Grace," Edmund said, running to keep up with him, "please consider carefully. It is best not to embroil yourself in the affair." William stopped in his tracks and faced his friend. "You wish me to stand by and do nothing while a woman is sold like livestock?" Edmund grimaced, his hands fiddling with the brim of the top hat he held. "Yes." He charged on before William could reply, "but only because I believe that ultimately it is in the best interest of everyone." William's frown deepened. "Everyone except that maid, you mean to say?" "It is an archaic and barbaric practice, Edmund. I am entirely in agreement with you. It is abhorrent, and once you are settled into your position and have had a chance to prove yourself in the House of Lords, you will be in a place to effect far-reaching change on the subject if you wish for it. But this," he gestured to the market cross, where the stalls were being left by customer and vendor alike, everyone bowing to their curiosity. "Your reputation as a duke is in its infancy, Your Grace. It is fragile, and I fear involving yourself in a vulgar situation such as this one may prove difficult to overcome." William's lips pressed together as he considered Edmund's words. They had discussed this topic at length. Difficult as it had been, officially becoming the Duke of Rockwood was the simple part. Being accepted as such by his fellow peers, that was another matter entirely, and heaven knew there was plenty of resistance to it. People did not take kindly to someone they had never heard of ascending to the highest non-royal title in the kingdom. The fact that William's brother Silas had fled to France not so very long ago, after being accused of murder, was certainly no help. "Hear ye! Hear ye!" yelled out a man's voice. The maid and the 3 men stood on the stone base of the market cross, several feet above the heads of their onlookers. "We bring ye here today," said one of the 3 men, "to offer up the finest wench in all the land to one of ye lucky men wishing for a wife." A number of cheers went up, and William's stomach turned. "'Tis a fine wench," the man said, "as John here can assure ye." The man, named John, nodded. The maid's head was turned to the side, her eyes trained away from the onlooking crowd. Her nostrils flared, and her jaw clenched. "She be young and strong," the man continued, "fit for work and play." He smiled suggestively. William gritted his teeth. How could he possibly stand here and do nothing while she was humiliated in such a way, particularly after she had done him such a service last night? He could not. Those blue eyes would haunt him for the rest of his life. He strode toward the crowd, shouldering through as the man started the bidding at 10 shillings. 3 hands raised, and the bid quickly went to 12, then stalled. "Come, lads," the man chided. "We all know she's worth a few pounds at least." "Then why'd you start at 10 shillings, Sam?" a woman in the crowd with a baby on her hip asked. "Only look." Sam tugged up the skirt of the maid's dress, revealing her worn boots and stockinged legs. She tried to yank her skirt down with her bound hands with only marginal success, and a few approving murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Can she cook?" a man who must have been nearly 60 asked through a mouthful of missing and tobacco-stained teeth. "Aye," Sam said, "and clean and keep house, and tend to horses." "She was a fine lady's maid afore," John called out, leading to a hum of chatter in the crowd. The 60-year-old's hand rose in the air. 14 shillings. 14 shillings, he says, Sam repeated. "Do I hear 16? There was a buzz of discussion, but no such offer. 14 shillings going once, Sam said. "Enough," William called out as he reached the front of the crowd. Every head turned in his direction, including the maid's. Her wide eyes met his, then turned away in humiliation. He wished he could make her understand there was no shame for her in any of this. It all belonged to her husband and his disgraceful friends. "You're wishing to bid, my lord?" Sam asked, his gaze awed and hopeful. William glanced at Edmund, who had opened his mouth to correct Sam's manner of addressing a duke, but he shut it again, no doubt realizing that making everyone aware of William's title was not at all conducive to their goals. "Far from it," William said. "I wish to put a stop to this entire business." "With respect, my lord," Sam said, "you've no right to. She's John's wench, and he can do with her as he sees fit. Ain't that right, John?" "Aye," John said. "He has something to sell," Sam said, "and there's people willing to buy." A hand grasped William's shoulder, and Edmund came up beside him. "Your Grace," he whispered, "please." 14 shillings, was it, sir?" Sam asked the old man with the stained teeth. The man nodded, an almost hungry look in his eyes as he stared at the maid. William clenched his jaw. Under no circumstances could he allow that man to buy her. "I will pay," William said loudly. Edmund's hand tightened on his shoulder. "You cannot," he hissed. "I must," William replied through gritted teeth. Sam's mouth pulled into a wide grin, and he glanced at John and his other friend before turning to William. "Will ye now, my lord?" "Yes. We will arrange things once everyone here has dispersed." "You heard the man," Sam called to the audience. "Go, be gone." With grumbling, the crowd began to clear out. "Your Grace," Edmund said, a pained expression on his face, "you must understand how this appears. Like I am saving a woman from humiliation. Like you are buying a wife." "Do not be ridiculous," William said. "You know as well as I that there is nothing legal about wife selling or wife buying." Edmund shook his head. "I do. These people do not. They accept it, and that matters when it comes to your reputation." William brushed off the unease that came with his friend's words. "And am I to care for the opinions of such people?" "Word travels, Your Grace. I am merely trying to stop this madness, Edmund, to free this woman from a terrible situation. But at what cost?" William's gaze settled on the maid. Perhaps he was being unwise. After all, he did not know her. She might be every bit the rapscallion her husband was. But looking at her and thinking on the events of the night before, William could not give credit to such an idea. Her cheeks were red with embarrassment, but her chin was held high. It made his chest tight to see. "Well then, my lord," Sam said, pulling her over while John and the other man trailed behind. "'Tis just us now, as ye see." "I wish to speak to John," William said, turning his focus to the man wearing the flat-brimmed hat on the dais. "You are her husband, are you not?" "Aye, my lord," John said. William surveyed him. He looked to be a few years older than William, with curly auburn hair and ruddy cheeks, made even redder by drink. How in the world had he persuaded the woman beside him to become his wife? And what should William pay to relieve him of her? Not that money could do such a thing, but John believed it would, and that was key to securing her liberty. William did not wish to encourage or enable the man or his friends in their debauchery by offering a great sum. He merely wished to liberate the maid. "I will give you a guinea," William said as a few scattered raindrops fell. Sam stepped forward. "Make it a guinea and 6 shillings, my lord. We swear she'll please ye." William fixed his hard stare upon the man, and Sam retreated beside the maid again. William's hand itched to punch his face, but he restrained himself. It would be difficult to do, situated so far below as he now was, and Edmund would have an apoplexy. "I will give you a guinea," William repeated. John glanced at Sam, who gave a disappointed nod. "Very well, my lord," John said. "My purse, Edmund," William said, keeping his eyes on John. Edmund sighed softly and a moment later handed John a coin. He took it and inspected it, then bit down upon it. "'Tis real," he assured Sam. William rolled his eyes. "Congratulations, my lord," Sam said. "You've bought yourself a wife." And with that, he pushed her forward. Chapter 4. Clara. Not expecting Sam's push, and with her hands bound, Clara had no way to stop herself from falling. She went careening over the edge of the stone dais and into the Duke and his associate. The Duke caught her and stumbled back, arms holding her against him as he found his footing, supported by the other man. The Duke pulled his head back to look down at Clara. "Are you hurt?" His dark, worried eyes searched her face under a pair of thick, knit brows. After being surrounded by dirty men, rank with the smell of spirits, her senses swam with the welcome scent of cedar and soap. An impulse to bury her head in the Duke's crisp travelling coat presented itself to her. She nodded as the utter humiliation of her situation descended upon her like thick fog. And yet, fog would at least have hidden her. There was no hiding in this market square. All of her shame had been laid bare for the entire village and the Duke to observe. Her bound hands sat against his chest, an unforgivable intimacy. Heaven only knew what she smelled of, so she quickly pushed off his chest and stepped backward. His arms released her, but his gaze still searched hers, settling for a moment on the gash on her cheek. It had come when she had fallen in the struggle with Sam and Thomas. John had apologized, but he had not stopped them from taking her to the square. The Duke's eyes moved to the halter around her neck. His jaw hardened as he lifted it over her head and handed it to his friend. His gaze travelled next to her bound hands. "Allow me," he said softly, taking her hands and working at the knot between them. "Allow me," said the man beside him with a quick, inscrutable glance at the Duke. The Duke hesitated, then stepped back, but Clara didn't miss the little tick in his jaw. The rope fell away, and Clara rubbed at her wrists. "Thank you," she said, torn between gratitude and humiliation. What would happen now? The Duke had bought her. For a single guinea. That was what she was worth to him. It was what she was worth to John, now that she had no more money to finance his vices. What would the Duke do with her now? He had saved her from the old man whose gaze had made her skin crawl. But for what purpose? His eyes seemed kind, but it could be difficult to differentiate between genuine kindness and the sort with ulterior motives. John's kindness may have been genuine at first, but Clara would always wonder if he had married her with the intent to use her money. As for Lord Redgrave, the husband of her past mistress, his sweetness had shattered the moment she had rebuffed him. If this Duke had such nefarious purposes in mind, there would be nothing she could do but run, and pray to heaven he didn't see fit to come after her as the other men had. Raised voices met her ears, and Clara sought out the source. Mr. Trumbull was having words with John in front of the inn. There was no hiding John's state now, and Clara had no desire to. She had done everything in her power to protect him, and how had he repaid her? He had sold her for money he would spend before the next day dawned. She was under no illusion he truly meant to buy her back. The moment he had money, he would use it for his true priorities. "What do you mean to do with me?" Clara asked tersely. The Duke's brows snapped together. "Do with you?" Her gaze flitted to his, and uncertainty filled her. "I meant to free you from those men," the Duke said, but there was an edge to his voice that made her cheeks fill with heat. She had offended him. "Thank you," she said softly, not meeting his eye as much from abashment as from deference. "Is there somewhere we can take you?" the Duke asked. Clara shook her head. She had nowhere to go. Papa had died shortly after helping her acquire her position as lady's maid, and she had never known her mother. "Is there anything we can do to help you?" She shook her head again. It was a lie, but her pride was still smarting. "Here," he took his purse from the other man. "I gave the innkeeper money to thank you for what you did last night, but something tells me you may not receive it." He pulled out another guinea. Taking her hand with the soft leather of his gloved ones, he set the guinea inside. "We should go, Your Grace," the Duke's associate said as the intermittent raindrops began to fall more frequently. "Wait," the Duke said. "Your cheek." Clara covered the injury with her hand. "It is nothing." He looked uncertain of this. "You are certain you will be well?" She nodded. "Very well." With a small sigh, he turned and walked toward the awaiting carriage with his friend. Clara stared at the gold coin in her dirty hand. A guinea was 6 weeks of wages. But what would she do with it? What could she do? She had been dismissed as a lady's maid and had no reference to offer another employer. Her time at the Coach and Lantern had been too short and tumultuous for Mr. Trumbull to be willing to provide one. She glanced at the Duke again as the two men drew nearer the carriage, and a hint of panic settled in. She had only been in this village a few weeks and had spent most of it trying to manage John. Strangely, the Duke now felt like her only friend in the world. He had bought her out of a desire to free her, he said. That was not something to be taken lightly or easily dismissed. Another man of his position or title would have expected something from her in return. No, not something. Everything. He must have an enormous staff, with maids coming and going regularly. His wife must employ her own personal servants too. Why not Clara, then? To have a position in a fine household with an employer she could respect was better than any other option she could think of. She squeezed the guinea in her fist, then ran toward the carriage, where the Duke's head ducked into the chaise. "Your Grace," she called as he disappeared, and his associate climbed in after him. The man on the steps paused, then backed down. The Duke's head reappeared in the doorway, his gaze searching until it found her. She hurried toward the carriage, shielding her face from the rain with a hand as her heart thudded against her ribs. The Duke's associate watched her with his lips pressed together, but she ignored him. "What is it?" the Duke asked, concern etched into his brow. Clara hesitated, but this was no time to lose her nerve. "Have you need of a maid?" The Duke stared. He seemed to be at a loss for words. "I work hard, Your Grace," Clara said, eager to make her case before he could deny her. "I have worked in a fine household as a lady's maid before. I can cook and clean." She lowered her eyes, realizing Sam had said something similar in his attempt to sell her. "I know how to conduct myself." "Your Grace." His friend's tone was full of disapproval and incredulity, and the gaze he squared the Duke with was clear. Her presumption was beyond the pale. Clara's cheeks filled with heat. "Forgive me," she said. "It was a silly—" She didn't bother finishing, but turned away, intent on putting as much distance between herself and this miserable village as possible. "Wait." She stopped in her tracks, but she didn't dare show her face, for her eyes were burning and filling with tears. "Come back," the Duke said, and she could hear the creak of the carriage steps as he came down them again. Clara swallowed, blinked rapidly to dispel the tears, then turned toward him again. "Your Grace," the other man repeated. Was he capable of forming any other words? "Edmund," the Duke responded in a kind but firm voice. "Please." Edmund nodded, but the way his mouth pinched made it clear he was having a difficult time containing what he wished to say. "What is your name?" the Duke asked. Clara hesitated, for she was still unused to her married name. She hated it more than ever now, but her maiden name was that of a thief. "Clara," she said. "Clara Quinn." "And you said you have experience as a lady's maid?" Clara nodded, wishing she'd had a moment to wash her face, rearrange her hair, and put on a fresh apron, for she looked fit for nothing but sweeping chimneys today. If only he could have seen her a year ago. Hair curled under her cap, while she wore the grey muslin day dress Lady Redgrave had given her from her own wardrobe when she no longer wished for it. If only he knew just how valued she had been by her mistress. until everything had crumbled. "Sadly, a lady's maid is not one of the servants I require in my employ," the Duke said with a little smile. "But surely the Duchess does," Clara said, "or perhaps an undermaid." "Undoubtedly she would if she existed." Clara's mouth opened wordlessly. She had assumed the Duke was married. It was only reasonable, for he was, well, a duke, not to mention handsome and kind besides. Weren't dukes meant to be old, portly, and full of gout? "So, no," the Duke continued, "I do not have a need for a lady's maid." Clara lowered her head and nodded, the hope she had felt slipping away as quickly as it had come. "However—" Beside the Duke, Edmund shifted his weight and turned his head to the side, looking as though words might burst forth from his mouth at any moment. The Duke continued, "I do have a seemingly constant need for housemaids. If that is a position you can accept, I can offer it to you. A housemaid in a duke's household." It was not a lady's maid, but it was nothing to sneer at. It was certainly better than being a maid at the Coach and Lantern, if such a position was even an option now. Edmund's foot tapped on the ground, but Clara ignored him. If the Duke of Rockwood thought her fit to employ, what did this other man's opinion matter? She would prove herself soon enough. "What do you say?" the Duke asked. Clara couldn't help a smile. "Yes, Your Grace, I will gladly accept it. Thank you." "You needn't thank me," he replied. "It is not charity I am providing. You will earn your keep and your wage. You will soon find that employment at Rushlake requires a great deal of walking." "I enjoy walking, Your Grace," Clara said, eager to reassure him that he would not regret his decision. He smiled and stepped up the stairs to the chaise again. "Then you will love Rushlake. Will 5 minutes be sufficient to gather your belongings?" "More than sufficient, Your Grace." She had few things to her name now, but she had work. Chapter 5. William. William smiled knowingly at Edmund, who sat across from him in the swaying carriage, staring out of the window as they made their way into Kent. Edmund's gaze flitted to him. "What?" "Come, then," William said with amusement. "Let me have it." "Have what?" William chuckled. "Edmund, if you keep it inside, it will spoil your day. Give me my reprimand and be free of it." "I haven't any idea what you're talking about, Your Grace." Edmund looked through the window again. William watched him for a moment, then stretched his legs as far as the carriage would allow. "Very good, then. I am glad my behaviour today meets with your full approval." He pulled off a glove finger by finger. Edmund shifted in his seat. "What was that?" William asked. Edmund cleared his throat. "Nothing, Your Grace." William set his gloves beside him on the seat, then laid his head back and closed his eyes. The silence lasted all of 15 seconds. "It is only that I am here to advise you, am I not?" William smiled and opened his eyes. "You are. And you are paying me a generous salary to do so." William nodded. "But if you do not think my advice worth taking, it feels wrong of me to take your money." William tried to control his smile. "I take a great deal of your advice, but not in this instance. It is only the matter of one maid, Edmund." That maid was currently seated outside next to the coachman. "A maid you bought. From her husband, no less. How do you think that news will be received at Rushlake, or in the House of Lords?" William didn't respond. Perhaps it had been unwise of him to pay the maid's husband and to agree to employ her, but how could he have done otherwise? How would he have lived with himself? "At the very least," Edmund said, "would it not have been prudent to ask for a reference from the lady she claims employed her?" "But I do not need a reference for a lady's maid, Edmund." Whether she can dress a woman or coif her hair has no bearing at all on what will be required of her at Rushlake. Besides, her manner of speech seems evidence enough that she has experience working in a large estate with a genteel mistress. And a woman who can perform the duties of a lady's maid, an ostler, and a coaching-in maid can surely manage the duties of a housemaid. Edmund sighed. Let us hope you are right. In the utterly impossible event that I am not, William teased, she can easily be dismissed. He hoped, however, that for the sake of his pride and Edmund's confidence in him, Clara would not force such an event. William had not been exaggerating when he had warned Clara she would be required to do a great deal of walking at Rushlake Hall. The estate had been constructed with the intent to impress, which meant long corridors, multiple floors, and a multitude of bedchambers and other, in William's eyes, superfluous rooms, such as a correspondence room, a trophy room, and a map room. They all add to your consequence, Edmund said as they walked into the study for a meeting. And to the number of servants I must keep, William replied dryly. His mind flitted to Clara. How was she faring? Though it had been almost a week since their arrival at Rushlake, he had yet to see her. It was not abnormal, of course. The servants were meant to do their work as inconspicuously as possible. He had been hesitant to ask the housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, about Clara, thanks to Edmund's warnings. It wouldn't do for him to take too keen an interest in a maid, particularly given the circumstances surrounding her employment. And yet it was precisely such circumstances that made him wish to ensure she was well. Had the wound on her cheek been properly cared for? Had she settled into her duties without undue difficulty? "Has Mrs. Finch said anything about the new maid?" he asked casually as he poured them drinks from the decanter. When he looked up, Edmund was watching him. William raised his brows, but Edmund remained silent. "What?" Edmund took the glass. "She is a very pretty young woman." The comment was meant to sound offhand. It was anything but that. "And a married one?" William took a seat. "To you?" William shot Edmund an unamused look. Edmund lifted his shoulders. "She would be considered something akin to it in the eyes of many." "Excepting the law and the church," William said flatly. "Now, shall we return to my question?" Edmund tipped his glass gently from side to side, eyes on the liquid within. "Mrs. Finch has made her an upper housemaid. She made an impression, I gather, with her proper speech and calm confidence." William took a sip from his glass, stretching his feet onto the velvet-upholstered footstool. It didn't surprise him that Clara had made an impression. She exuded a level of capability most housemaids only achieved with significant time and experience. "I gather, however," Edmund continued, "that not everyone is thrilled with her arrival. It seems the story of the auction has made the rounds." William frowned. "How? You have not said anything, have you?" "Naturally not. But the autant does not have a monopoly on gossip, Your Grace. It has always amazed me how news can travel from London to Edinburgh in a matter of days." William sighed. "And what form have these feelings amongst the other servants taken?" "Mrs. Finch did not say, but given what I have seen in the past, I imagine a bit of ostracization and a generous dose of coldness. Nothing you need concern yourself with. This is all Mrs. Finch's domain." William nodded, but it bothered him all the same. Surely the maid deserved a reprieve from poor treatment. "You wished to speak on another matter, I think?" "I did." Edmund set his empty glass on the table beside his chair and sat forward, leaning his elbows on his knees. "On the matter of achieving your acceptance and increasing your influence amongst your peers." William stifled a sigh. It was not that he didn't wish for acceptance and influence. He did, deeply even. His duty to magnify his position and the York name had been drilled into him by his father as far back as he could remember. It was just that he hadn't realized a strategy would be necessary now that he held a dukedom. He had assumed the title itself would come with such things. "And what do you suggest?" "I have a few ideas, Your Grace." William narrowed his eyes. "Your tone alone frightens me." Edmund chuckled. "There is no need for fear. I am not suggesting anything out of the ordinary for someone in your position." "Someone in my position? And how many men are there in England who have come suddenly into a dukedom?" He raised his brows, waiting. "A rough estimate will suffice." Edmund grimaced. "Precisely. But let us have the first suggestion. What must I do to court the favour of my esteemed colleagues?" "Do you want the most effective option first, or the most palatable?" William stared at his friend for a moment, considering. The sooner he could garner favour and influence, the better. He rose to his feet. "Effective. Very well. What you now lack that your fellows have in abundance is connections." William nodded, pacing the floor, and spun the large globe as he passed it. "And the most certain and tangible connection is—" William stopped the globe with a hand and stared. "Edmund?" Edmund stood, putting up his hands, as though trying to reason with the Duke. I know, but you cannot deny it would be effective. I can hardly wrap my head around the life I am leading now. The last thing I need is to throw myself into marriage. But only think, Your Grace, you could easily find a daughter of a peer, ready and willing to become a duchess, someone born and bred to fill such a role. And what is more, I think if we played things right, we could kill two birds with one stone, as it were." William narrowed his eyes. "Meaning?" "We have discussed the obstacle you face as a result of your brother's situation." They had, ad nauseam, in fact. William's younger brother, Silas, had fled to France over a year ago as a result of a murder accusation. An unmerited one, William now knew. As though that was not scandal enough to be attached to the York name, the man who had accused Silas of the murder was Lord Drayton, one of the most influential and wealthy peers in England, and the man truly responsible for the murder. Drayton's animosity toward the York family was a significant barrier to William's thriving in his new position. "I have not heard from him in almost 2 months," William said with a frown. "I am beginning to worry." Edmund blew out a breath. Any time the topic of Silas was broached, his stress was tangible. "What of his situation, though?" William asked. "Do you have an idea?" Edmund leaned forward even more. "Can you imagine the bridges a marriage between you and Drayton's daughter would build?" "No," William said flatly. He gave the globe another spin and set to pacing again. He had thought he was ready to discuss this topic, but he had been wrong. It was entirely overwhelming. And marrying a daughter of Drayton's was utter hogwash. Drayton would never allow it. And William would never ally himself with that man in such a way, even if it were a possibility. "Next suggestion." "You mean my next suggestion for a wife?" Edmund clarified. "Edmund," William said in a warning voice, "I will marry eventually. I will produce heirs. I promise. But for now, I am unable to entertain such a thought. Let us move on to the next, non-marital suggestion." Edmund sighed. "My next suggestion is that you host guests here, a great number of them preferably. People will be able to see you at your ease at Rushlake. They will be able to socialize and enjoy themselves under your wing. Under my wing and at my expense." "Yes," Edmund granted. "It will engender trust and confidence, Your Grace. There is no way around the financial investment it requires." William had always assumed money abounded for titled men, but he was coming to realize that the lifestyle expected of such individuals could quickly drown one in debt. And who are we to invite to such a party when the entire point of it is to convince people I am someone worth accepting invitations from? Your Grace, Edmund said with a broad smile, their curiosity and desire for entertainment will outweigh any reservations, I assure you. And at the end of it all, we will have a ball where we can invite even more guests who will naturally wish to hear from the others about their experience staying with the Duke of Rockwood. William rubbed his forehead. After a morning of going over accounts, he was feeling the beginnings of a headache coming on. Talk of marriage and hosting guests were no cure. Parties and polite conversation were not his preferred way to spend time, but evidently they would need to become such if he was to fill the shoes of his father's cousin. Very well, perhaps you can work on compiling a list of people to invite. In the meantime, I think I will take a walk. With no fewer than 20 servants employed in the gardens alone, someone should certainly be enjoying them. However, a few minutes of walking amongst the short hedges and flowered beds of the formal gardens left William baking under the late morning sun. Desperate for shade, he cut through one of the smaller paths and beneath the ivy archway that led to the woods, where he would be protected from the summer heat. The cover of shade the dense leaves above provided was a welcome respite, and William marvelled silently at the way his view was filled, as far as the eye could see, with tall trunks and thick vegetation. It was difficult to believe this land all belonged to him. Rushlake was vast, and William was both overwhelmed and gratified by that fact. He was accustomed to managing an estate, as he had inherited his father's upon his death, but there was simply no comparison. York Manor was fine and respectable, but both the grounds and house were less than 1/10 of the size of Rushlake's. He neared a small area where the trees were less dense, and a dirt and moss-covered mound rose up amongst them. It was the ice house, a perfect example of the type of thing York Manor lacked that set Rushlake apart as a truly fine estate. A burlap sack sat just outside the ice house's iron grate door, which was open. William frowned. This was only the second time he had even seen the ice house, but he was reasonably certain the door was kept locked. He walked toward it, and the sound of movement within met his ears. It was almost completely dark within, but he stepped inside, stopping well before the drop-off where the ice was accessed by ladder. It was delightfully cool within. He squinted, trying to make out the movements of whoever was working at the bottom. The person's head turned up to look at William. "Thank heaven," the female voice said. "I had begun to think no one would come. Bring me the sack, if you please. The pieces are much larger than I anticipated." It was Clara. He knew that from the way she spoke, but he heavily suspected she didn't know to whom she was speaking. From her vantage point, he would be but a silhouette. Edmund would undoubtedly tell him to rectify that situation and make himself known, but William hesitated. Perhaps it was the fact that he had not been spoken to in the authoritative way Clara was speaking to him now for weeks and weeks. It had all been deference and crushing politeness since he had become Duke. It could be that it was a welcome divergence from so many mornings spent writing correspondence or going over accounts at his desk. It might be a reluctance to leave the blissful chill of the ice house. Or perhaps William was simply losing his mind. Whatever the reason, he retraced his steps and brought the burlap sack back to the top of the ladder. Crouching, he extended the sack toward the maid, but the hole where the ice was kept was deep, and her fingers reached for it in vain. "You will have to come down," she said with a hint of impatience and, William suspected, chattering teeth. "I will need your help holding the sack open." William hesitated another moment, but he was determined to see this through, so he turned around and took the ladder down into the cold, ice-filled abyss. Clara moved to the side to make way for him, but the amount of space uncovered by chunks of ice and the straw that blanketed it was limited, and their bodies pressed against each other. "Hold it open as widely as possible," she said, as she bent and picked up the nearest piece of ice. Edmund would have been horrified to hear William being spoken to with such authority by a mere housemaid, but William's mouth pulled into an amused smile as he obeyed the instruction. Part of him wished to offer to exchange duties with her, but the moment he spoke, he would give himself away, so he remained silent. He was impressed by her strength as she hefted a large block of ice and slid it into the bag. "Do you think that is enough?" She looked around the dark hole, then at the bag. William cleared his throat, and her head whipped around. Apparently, he could not even clear his throat without betraying that he was not a servant. Her wide eyes searched his face in the dark, then her lips parted in surprise. Unwelcome surprise. "Your Grace!" "Forgive me," he said. "It was so hot outside, I could not resist when you ordered me to help you." She shut her eyes in consternation and dropped her head. It was too dark to see, but he suspected her cheeks would be red too. The impulse to touch one to see whether it was as hot as he assumed it would be was immediately discarded. He was losing his mind. It was Edmund's talk of Clara's beauty and his nonsense about her being his wife. "Forgive me, Your Grace," she said, eyes still averted. "I swear I had no notion to whom I was speaking. I have been awaiting a footman." "And I bear striking similarity to one?" Her head came up, her eyes wide again. "No, of course not. Only all I could see was a man's silhouette and—" "Clara," William interrupted, smiling, "I am only teasing. You bear no fault. The blame lies entirely with me." She shook her head, her eyes still fixed on his. As though remembering herself, she dropped her chin, breaking their gazes. "Please, Your Grace." She grasped the bag just under his hand and pulled it toward her firmly. William resisted. "Let me help." "No, Your Grace," she added quickly. "That is an order, Clara." Without waiting, he slung the sack over his shoulder and began climbing the ladder. It was an awkward affair, and by the time he reached the top, a few beads of sweat had gathered at his hairline despite the coolness within. He set the sack on the ground, then extended a hand to Clara. She glanced at it, then up at him. After a moment's hesitation, she took the hand, and he pulled her onto firm ground. Edmund would have fits if he were witnessing this, but there was no chance of that. They were entirely alone in the woods, and William did not regret it. It was nice to have a respite from playing the part of a duke, for it certainly still felt as though that was what he was doing. "Thank you, Your Grace," Clara said, taking the bag, her cheeks every bit as red as he had imagined. Their vibrant colour made her blue eyes look even brighter. "It was the least I could do after playing that trick on you." She smiled slightly, and William's heart tripped. Would some people truly believe the two of them were married? Perhaps not married, but lovers? That was entirely possible. A bird took flight from a nearby tree, making the leaves rustle and their heads turn. The silence returned in full force, however, and a thought struck William. "What are you doing fetching the ice? Surely that is a duty for someone else." She hesitated. "Normally, perhaps." "And what about today is abnormal?" She said nothing, and comprehension began to dawn upon him. "Clara, your duties as a housemaid are fairly specific, and though I am no expert in the matter, I am quite certain they do not comprise fetching ice from the icehouse. Am I correct?" "Yes, Your Grace," she said meekly. He watched her for a moment. "Were you assigned this task as a punishment of sorts?" "It is not a task anyone relishes." "I understand why, but that is not what I asked. Were you assigned it as a form of punishment? I must insist that you answer me truthfully." She shut her eyes. "I believe so." "And have there been other tasks outside of your regular duties as an upper housemaid that have been required of you?" Another hesitation. "Yes." "Such as?" Her hands gripped the bag tightly. "Fetching water and scrubbing the kitchen steps." emptying the chamber pots. William's mouth went tight. Those were duties of the scullery maids and lower housemaids. And is there something you have done to merit such punishment? Her gaze came up to meet his, imploring. Please do not make me answer that, Your Grace. Clara, he said, stepping toward her, I again insist that you answer. She swallowed, then dropped her gaze away. Not many of the servants are pleased with my presence here, Your Grace. There is talk. What sort of talk? There was a pause. About us, Your Grace. His heart stuttered. Us? She nodded. And what are they saying? William waited, but his heartbeat was quick and strong. They say I am only employed here because you and I... She glanced up at him, her blue eyes tortured, and her cheeks scarlet. His jaw clenched. I understand. They were punishing Clara for no reason at all. Until today, he had not even seen her at Rushlake, much less enjoyed the level of intimacy they seemed to assume. Edmund had warned him of this, but William had interpreted such warnings as for himself, the way he would be viewed. He had not truly considered how they would affect Clara. I will speak with Mrs. Finch. He turned toward the house. No. Her hand grasped his, halting his progress, and he turned toward her in surprise. Her gaze flitted to their hands, and she dropped his, averting her eyes. Forgive me, but I beg you to say nothing. Why not? I must prove myself to them, Your Grace. It is the only way. If you speak with Mrs. Finch, it will only make things worse. It will confirm to them that the rumours about us are true. He watched her for a moment. What precisely did people think they were doing? Stealing kisses in corridors? Concealing themselves in the map room for intimate moments? The images such ideas presented, unbelievable as they were, sent his pulse racing. He hardly had time to sit down for a proper meal, much less whisk a busy maid into his arms without anyone noticing. Very well, he said. If you truly wish for me to stay silent, I will. I do wish it, Your Grace. His jaw worked, his frustration bubbling. He couldn't help but admire her resolution, though. She would rather perform degrading tasks to prove herself than have him step in to save her. She glanced up at him. I am sorry. I never meant to cause you trouble. It is not your fault, he said curtly. He looked at the heavy burlap sack and shook his head. An upper housemaid should not be carrying such a burden all the way to the house. He would have offered to do it, but evidently that would only make things worse for her. Is a footman coming to assist you? They assured me one would, she said. He nodded. I should go. Of course. Good day to you, Your Grace. He looked at her one last time, then strode back to the house, full of frustration. When he looked through the window of the long corridor a few minutes later, Clara was carrying the heavy sack toward the servants' entrance by herself. He was fairly certain she had known that would be required of her when he had asked whether someone was coming to assist her. She had likely been worried the Duke would insist on helping, and she would rather do things on her own than accept assistance from him. It was undoubtedly for the best, but it bothered him all the same. Chapter 6. Clara. Clara carried an armful of linens up the servants' staircase, admiring for the 100th time how spacious the stairs were. At the Coach and Lantern, and even at the Redgraves estate, the stairs were narrow and uneven, making the task of carrying anything fragile or liquid a hazardous one. But even the servant areas below stairs in Rushlake had high ceilings, so that, though the other servants were far from accepting Clara as one of them, she did not feel as trapped as she otherwise would have. Even the young and nervous lower housemaid, Eliza, who had begun at Rushlake yesterday, had already been welcomed into the fold. It had almost been 2 weeks since Clara's arrival, and she finally knew her way around the grand estate. This morning, she had been tasked with changing the linens in the bedchambers. Though they had received no guests recently, Mrs. Finch insisted the sheets not be left to become stale. The Duke had already left his bedchamber for the day, and the lower housemaids were at work on their daily dusting, emptying of chamber pots, and cleaning of the fireplaces. A quick glance in the Duke's bedchamber told Clara the newest maid was being instructed at the hearth. Though Clara made beds every day, she had yet to enter the Duke's bedchamber, and she was too intelligent not to understand why. Privately, she had been tempted more than once to seek out the Duke and inform him she had changed her mind, and did indeed wish for him to give the housekeeper and other servants a stern talking to. But instead, she accepted with equanimity whatever duties she was given, no matter how below her position they were. With honesty, hard work, and kindness, she had to believe things would improve, and the other servants would come to trust her. Voices sounded around the corner, and Clara slowed instinctively, wishing she could avoid whoever it was by slipping behind the curtains, but her pride refused. "The master doesn't seem like a man to keep a mistress," said the voice Clara recognised as Mary's. Mary had been at Rushlake the longest of the housemaids, more than 2 years. "He's too proper." "She's beguiled him," said the other maid, Sarah, "with her fancy talk and fine hair. Jimmy says he saw her prowl in the corridors in the middle of the night. He followed her, and she stopped in front of the master's door." Clara flushed as the 2 maids came into view. Their talk ceased abruptly, but there was no apology in their expressions as they scooted around Clara and continued down the corridor. Clara shut her eyes and forced herself to breathe slowly. She had hoped the gossip would dissipate with time, but so far it had simply grown more outlandish. She had never prowled the corridors at night, and she had assuredly never stopped in front of the Duke's door, well, aside from watching Eliza just now. Beyond the humiliation hearing such rumours caused, Clara most regretted it for the Duke's sake. He had done her a service by employing her at Rushlake, and for his pains, his name was being bandied about amongst the servants. Clara entered the first guest bedchamber, set down the folded linens on the chair near the fire, and began pulling the sheets from the bed. She had tried to defend the Duke once, but it had only led the maids and footmen to look at one another knowingly, as though it was precisely what they would expect of a woman seducing her master. The most frustrating part of all, perhaps, was that Clara did admire the Duke. Too much for her own good. She spent the days simultaneously hoping she would run into him and trying to avoid him for his sake. Whenever she caught sight of him in one of the rooms off the corridors or through a window, her heart would trip and skitter. Her mind would try to concoct a reason she needed to enter that particular room, or take that path through the gardens, or speak directly with him. Something not only unnecessary, but expressly forbidden. All communication was to pass through Mrs. Finch. And yet the pull she felt remained, ridiculous as it was. She might as well have set her sights on the king. But at the ice house, he had not treated her with the disdain or indifference a servant might expect from someone in his position. He had treated her like a friend. He might easily have taken advantage of the situation, or forced himself upon her when he had found her alone. But he had not. And now her heart was making a mountain out of a molehill, for she found herself thinking on that interaction multiple times a day. In many ways, the Duke felt like her only ally at Rushlake. The way she felt was not just ridiculous, though. Many would feel it wrong. John might have sold her, but under the Church of England and the law, she was still married. And yet she did not feel like a married woman. Her heart, certainly, had never been given to John. In fact, she had almost been at Rushlake as long as they had been married. Now that she was here, it all felt a bit like a dream, a bad dream. It was behind her now, and yet she couldn't help feeling the sting of guilt every time she heard the servants gossiping. She was making the Duke's life more difficult by being here. It was poor thanks for what he had done for her. When she had finished with the guest bedchambers, she gathered up the soiled laundry to take to the laundry yard. A clatter somewhere behind brought her up short. It was followed by yet another clatter and muffled exclamations. Clara doubled back in the direction of it. "No, no, no," said a distraught voice. Clara peeked her head into the Duke's bedchamber, and her eyes widened. Eliza stood with a duster in hand in front of the dressing table. A few bottles lay upon it, tipped over. Around Eliza's feet and at the hem of her skirts was soot, and a bucket lay on its side nearby. Eliza turned toward Clara, her eyes wide with terror. "'Twas a mistake, I swear it. I was just dustying and tidying and I knocked over a bottle. I stepped back in surprise, clean forgetting about the bucket of ash." The words came out of her mouth like the rushing tide. Clara set her armful of linens down and went into the bedchamber. "Oh dear," Eliza said, her voice breaking and her eyes filling with tears as she looked around her. "Mrs. Finch'll have me dismissed straight away when she sees this mess." Clara couldn't allay such a fear. Eliza was new, which meant she hadn't had time to prove herself. Mrs. Finch had no patience for clumsiness, particularly not when it came to the Duke's personal belongings, and the smell filling the room told Clara that perfume had been spilled. Eliza's hand covered her mouth, her shoulders beginning to shake with sobs. She was young, 16 at most, and Clara's heart went out to her. Clara hurried over and took the maid's hand between hers. "Calm yourself, Eliza. All will be well." "How, though? If I'm dismissed again, my father will wash his hands of me and have nowhere to go. Oh, please help me, Clara." Clara nodded, her mind whirring as she tried to think how she could possibly salvage the situation. She could help Eliza clean the mess, but Eliza's entire body was trembling. Her fear of Mrs. Finch was simply too strong to make her of any use. "Here," Clara said, pulling Eliza toward the door. "Gather the linens I brought. Take them to the laundry yard. I will clean the mess. I know how to remove soot from rugs." But... Hurry, Eliza. If you wish to keep your position, time is of the essence. Eliza nodded quickly, then scooped up the pile of linens. "Careful not to let them touch the bottom of your skirts, or you will soil them more. Once you have taken the linens, bring me dry rags, a stiff brush, and vinegar." Within seconds, Eliza was gone. Clara let out a gushing breath through her lips, then turned to survey the mess. Which was more urgent, the ash scattered all over the wood floor and rugs, or the spilled perfume? The ash was certainly more shocking to the eye, but she should at least set the bottles upright and reseal the one whose contents had spilled. She took a rag from amongst Eliza's materials and stepped carefully around the sooty floor. The dressing table held an ivory comb, a brush, items for shaving, and various glass bottles. 3 of those bottles were tipped over, a puddle of liquid surrounding them. It smelled of jasmine and orange blossom, a distinctly feminine scent. Had it been given to him as a gift by a woman? How would he react when he discovered there was little left of the perfume? "Oh, Eliza," Clara muttered. She replaced the stopper in the bottle and set the other 2 to rights, thankful those at least had not leaked. Using the rag, she mopped up the pool of perfume. By the time the table was dry, the rag had soaked through. She set it on the table just as Eliza appeared with the cleaning supplies. "Set them just there, away from the soot," Clara instructed. Eliza obeyed quickly. Her shaking had abated somewhat, but her fingers still trembled as Clara guided her through how to clean the soot. Most of it had landed on the floors, thankfully. The rug, though, was a problem. It was not one that could easily be taken out for beating, as the ornate 4-poster bed belonging to the Duke sat upon it. They would simply have to do their best. The dark fibres of the rug worked in their favour, certainly. Approaching footsteps brought both their heads up. Their gazes met, Eliza's terror-stricken. If Mrs. Finch saw this, there was little hope for Eliza, or Clara for that matter. Clara held her breath as the footsteps drew nearer. It was the Duke's frame that filled the doorway, pausing on the threshold in surprise. Her heart thudded as their eyes met, his blinking, no doubt at the pervasive smell in the room. "Your Grace?" Eliza's voice squeaked as she rose to her feet. Clara hurried up with her, grasping the maid's arm firmly to stop her from her nervous, chattering admission of guilt. "It was me, Your Grace," Clara said, swallowing. "In my clumsiness, I fear I made a great mess." Silence followed this admission, and it lasted long enough that Clara chanced a glance at the Duke. His eyes were on her, something unidentifiable in them. His gaze shifted to Eliza. "What is your name?" Eliza did not respond, and Clara bumped her with an elbow. "Forgive me," Eliza said. "I didn't know you were speaking to me, Your Grace. Eliza is my name." "You are dismissed, Eliza." Her eyes grew round and her chin trembled. "I believe he means from the room," Clara said, half question, half reassurance. "Yes, of course," the Duke clarified. A burst of shaky laughter erupted from Eliza, which she hurried to cover with a hand. "Yes, Your Grace." She set down her cleaning supplies, and moments later was gone. The Duke stepped into the room, and the silence stretched long as Clara awaited her fate. She kept her head held low, but her eyes watched his glistening boots as they drew nearer and nearer, then came to a stop 2 feet from her. "It was not you, was it?" he finally asked. "It was, Your Grace." She did not think the Duke would dismiss Eliza for her clumsiness, but if he mentioned the incident to Mrs. Finch, she wouldn't hesitate to. Clara was no favourite of the housekeepers, but her work was satisfactory and consistent. She stood a better chance than Eliza. "Clara," the Duke said. She shut her eyes and took in a breath. Why did hearing her name on his lips steal her breath like a thief? "Cleaning the fireplace is not one of your duties," he said. "Not normally." Realizing it sounded as though she was correcting him, she hurried to add, "Your Grace." "There seems to be a great deal of abnormality in your days," he commented with a hint of dry amusement. "I shall just ring for Mrs. Finch. She can verify to whom she gave the task." He took a step toward the bell. "No." Clara grasped his hand, then dropped it as though it was a white-hot iron from the forge. She clasped her fingers into a fist and brought them to her chest in embarrassment. "Clara." "Yes, Your Grace." "Look at me." She brought her eyes up slowly and met his brown ones. "Protecting Eliza is honourable," he said, "but I do not wish for you to lie to me again. Do you understand?" She nodded quickly, then dropped her gaze, for meeting his kind eyes did things to her she would never admit to. The way he was speaking to her did not feel like a master chastising his servant. It felt like a man begging his friend for honesty. "I take it my perfume spilled," he said. "I am very sorry," she said, unable to stop herself from stealing a glance at him. But he was walking toward the dressing table, his back to her. Clara hurried over to move the perfume-saturated rag upon it. "I wiped up the perfume, but I have yet to thoroughly clean the area." He picked up the blue bottle that had spilled and shook it gently, looking at the little that remained of its contents. "It was the scent my mother wore." Clara clenched her eyes shut. "I am so sorry, Your Grace." He shook his head. "I have it made up regularly. It is one of the few things I remember about her." He opened the stopper and ran the bottle under his nose, frowning. "It never quite captures her, though. Perhaps it was the clothes or her skin that made the difference." Clara brought her hand to her nose and smelled it, intrigued. The Duke watched her with curiosity. "I have a great deal on my hands from cleaning it," she explained. "And? What is your assessment?" She put her hand to her nose again and shut her eyes. It was difficult to detect with the room so full of the scent, but there was a subtle difference to the one on her skin. It was a gentler scent. She opened her eyes. "I think you are right. There is a difference on the skin." His gaze shifted to her hand, a mixture of curiosity and hesitation in his eyes. "May I?" Heart thrumming, Clara nodded and extended her hand toward him. His fingers wrapped gently around her wrist, and he lowered his head until his warm breath tickled the bare skin near her dress sleeve. He shut his eyes and inhaled, taking every last bit of Clara's breath with him. She cast her eyes to the ceiling, trying to calm her pulsing of her heart and keep her eyes and thoughts from wandering. "It smells differently on you," he said after a moment, his brow furrowed. "Different from the bottle, yes, but different from what I remember when my mother wore it too." "It does? Was that a good or bad thing?" He nodded, then readjusted his light grip on her wrist and inhaled lightly again, his forehead wrinkled in concentration. A throat cleared nearby, and Clara jumped back in surprise as the Duke's hand released hers. Mrs. Finch stood in the doorway, watching Clara, her nostrils flared. Heat rushed into Clara's cheeks, and she began gathering up her things. "What happened here?" Mrs. Finch asked. Clara's gaze flitted to the Duke. "A small incident involving one of the other maids," he said evenly. Mrs. Finch's lips pressed into a thin line of displeasure. "Eliza, I don't doubt. I will speak with her immediately, Your Grace. It will not happen again." "I do not wish for her to be dismissed, Mrs. Finch. It was a simple accident, and there is no real harm done." Clara kept her eyes trained on her belongings as she gathered them, but her racing heart was warm with gratitude toward him. He took care of his servants in a way she found as refreshing as it was admirable. Mrs. Finch gave a curt nod. "As you wish, Your Grace." The Duke strode to the dressing table, opened the top drawer, and took out a pocket watch, which he glanced at, then slipped into his tailcoat. His eyes met Clara's for a brief moment, then he nodded and left the room. It was not until the sound of his footsteps disappeared that Mrs. Finch spoke. "You will finish cleaning, then come speak with me." "Yes, Mrs. Finch," Clara said meekly. It was not Eliza who needed fear dismissal today. Chapter 7. William. William headed straight for the library. Only a duke as inexperienced as he would feel like a schoolboy caught by the master when his housekeeper found him with a maid. Was not one of the prerequisites of being a duke that one could act as one pleased without worrying for the opinions of others? And yet William did worry over such opinions. It had been all he could do to calmly let go of Clara's wrist, but still, the way things must have appeared to Mrs. Finch, they were not at all based in reality. And yet, William hated to be thought anything less than upstanding, and he hated for anyone to think ill of Clara. She did not deserve such a reputation. She was entirely innocent. He had asked to smell the perfume on her hands, and how was she to do anything but agree? He was her master, after all. For some reason, he found himself making poor decisions in her presence. Part of him felt comfortable with her, as though he could be himself. That was something he was coming to value greatly. He missed his brothers for that precise reason. They had known him as William York, and they would not expect him to be anything but what they had always known him to be. Granted, that was a starched-up bore, according to his younger brother Anthony, and to Silas, William was an unimaginative traditionalist. Frederick, the youngest, admired him at least. William would have to invite Anthony and Frederick to visit. As for Silas, well, there was no telling if or when William would ever see him again. Anthony had expressed a hope William would be able to use his influence as a duke to turn the tide of favour to Silas's benefit, allowing him to return to England without fear of the gallows. But William had no influence, at least not yet. He was determined to gain it. He took a seat at the desk in his study and pulled a sheet of parchment from the neat stack there. He brought his hand to his chin, brushing the feather of the quill against his ear absently. Jasmine and orange blossom filled his senses, and he shut his eyes. Some of the perfume from Clara's hand must have transferred to his skin. What had he been thinking, smelling her like that? Her pulse had hummed in the wrist he had held. He was certain of that. Whether it was from fear or something else, he couldn't tell. Mrs. Finch's arrival had prevented him from being able to judge such a thing. And so much the better. William could not be thinking of his housemaids in such a way. He had always despised the men who availed themselves of their servants. He would not become one of them. If his mind insisted on exploring such avenues with the opposite sex, marriage with an aim to strengthen the title and his influence was the way forward. There was a knock, followed by Edmund appearing in the doorway. "Might I have a word, Your Grace?" "Of course. Come in." Edmund came and took a seat across the desk from William, a paper in hand. "Do I want to see that?" William asked warily. "I hope so. It is the list I have compiled of potential guests." William looked at it with misgiving. "It looks incredibly long." "So it is, Your Grace. Rushlake has a plethora of guest bedchambers, and, of course, those who live nearby can simply join the festivities as they please. Or, hopefully, as they do not please." Edmund squared him with an amused stare. "Your Grace, we do not have to invite anyone, you know. I only suggest it because you expressed the wish on multiple occasions to— Yes, I know. I am only being difficult. You do want to hear the names, then?" "I do." William fiddled with the magnifying glass on the desk as he listened to Edmund read the names of various lords and ladies and wealthy landowners. He recognized most of the names, and a number of them he had met, even if briefly, while in London. After a time there was a pause, and William looked up. "Is that the end?" Edmund shook his head, but there was a hint of reluctance in his eyes. "I ask you to keep an open mind for the next name, Your Grace. Simply look at inviting her as an opportunity to become acquainted." William narrowed his eyes. "Let us have it, then." Edmund cleared his throat and looked down at the paper, a gesture William assumed was more an excuse not to meet his eye than an actual need to read from it. "Lady Cassandra Montrose." There was a pause, and Edmund's eyes flitted to the Duke's. Lady Cassandra was the daughter of Lord Hawkesbury, an earl. William knew her by reputation only, but that reputation was certainly a good one. Hosting her with an aim to courtship was better than hosting Drayton's daughter, at least. "When do we send invitations?" William asked. Edmund stared, searching the Duke's face. "As easy as that? Would you prefer I made it more difficult?" "Of course not, but I anticipated at least a bit of arguing on your part." William smiled. "I am a constant disappointment to you, aren't I?" "On the contrary, I have been considering what you said, Edmund. I do that from time to time, you know. And you just so happen to be right on this matter. Do not, for heaven's sake, allow it to go to your head. I must marry, sooner rather than later, if I wish to reap the benefits of such an alliance, which means I must become acquainted with prospective brides." Now, why did Clara's face flash across his mind at that particular moment? Edmund hadn't truly meant he had any husbandly responsibility toward her. He had only said such things to prove his point, that William should keep his distance. "Your reasoning is sound, Your Grace," Edmund said meekly, a little twitch at the corner of his mouth. "As always," William said with his own flicker of amusement. "Naturally, as far as invitations, if we mean to have the guests here within the next few weeks, invitations should be sent as soon as can be managed." "And how soon can be managed?" "Tomorrow, if we wish." He smiled at William's surprise. "I began the process of writing them out. Absent the names, of course, a few days ago when we first discussed the idea. What would I do without you, Edmund? Fall into a manner of scrapes, no doubt." Edmund's smile became more of a grimace. "Speaking of which—" "Oh dear, what have I done to complicate your life now?" William cast his mind over the past week, but he had been at Rushlake. In London, it had been very easy to say or do something unsuitable. At Rushlake, it was different. Edmund sat forward, resting his elbows on the edge of William's desk. "It is about the new maid, Your Grace. I understand you were found together in your bedchamber." William's hand itched to tug at his cravat, but he suppressed the impulse. "My, how quickly news travels. I happened to speak with Mrs. Finch on a matter before coming here, and she seemed very put out about what she had seen. She saw nothing." The silence that followed his words brought his gaze to Edmund, who was watching him closely. "Very well. Rather, she misinterpreted what she saw. Either way, Your Grace, I think the topic of the maid merits discussion." William sighed, then nodded reluctantly. "Very well. Let us discuss things." Chapter 8. Clara. One door to a room was not sufficient for a ducal estate like Rushlake. Each of the rooms on the main floor was fitted with 2 doors, separated by a small vestibule in which was located a closet for storage or shelves to display trinkets of value. The set of doors allowed for more privacy and for heat to be kept more efficiently in the rooms requiring it. The servants there, Clara had found, referred to this space as the in-between, and would speak of the drawing-room in-between or the library in-between when explaining where certain supplies were stored. She balanced the broom and dustbin in one hand and opened the door leading to the library in-between. She contemplated organising the closet, for once she put these supplies away, she would be obliged to go speak with Mrs. Finch in the housekeeper's room below stairs. She was under no illusion that would be a happy conversation. She placed the broom and bin amongst the other cleaning supplies and shut the cupboard door. The door to the library was ajar, and she grasped the handle to close it, halting at the sound of her name. "You believe I should dismiss Clara, then?" said the Duke from within the library. "I do, Your Grace," Mr. Cartwright replied. Clara stiffened. In her time at Rushlake, she had learned that Mr. Cartwright acted as a sort of personal secretary and adviser to the Duke of Rockwood. The other servants thought well of him, but Clara couldn't help resenting him a bit. He seemed to have taken a dislike to her from the beginning. "It would be terribly cruel, Edmund," the Duke said. "She has done nothing wrong." "That is arguable." "How?" "It was her decision to marry a drunkard. That choice put her in the position in which we found her." Clara couldn't move, but her stomach turned, perhaps because she felt a grain of truth in his words. But if she had truly known John's vices, she would not have entertained the thought of marriage to him. "She says she was a lady's maid before," Mr. Cartwright continued. "Why, then, had she stooped to performing the duties of a common inn-maid, and now a housemaid? Why not continue as a lady's maid elsewhere? To me, the situation seems suspect. But the point is, Your Grace, that there are any number of people who could perform the work she is doing here, so I struggle to think of any reason for keeping her on when her presence causes such harm to your reputation." There was silence, and Clara could barely breathe as she waited for the Duke's response. But it was Mr. Cartwright who spoke again. "Do you understand the harm it does?" "Yes," the Duke said quietly. Clara's heart twinged. What had she expected? For him to rise to her defence? Her mind seemed to be concocting absurd fantasies of the Duke, thrusting him into the role of a chivalrous knight who had come to her rescue. And yet her heart hurt all the same. "I cannot, in good conscience, dismiss her, Edmund. I told her I would provide her a position, and I am a man of my word." Surely you can make an effort to quell the gossip below stairs. Mrs. Finch ought to have put a stop to it already." Clara let go of the handle and slipped out into the corridor, shutting the door as quietly as possible behind her. She put a hand on her stomach and forced herself to breathe. Mr. Cartwright was desperate for her to be gone. And to the Duke? It was pity that kept him from having her dismissed. Well, given her destination, they might soon have their way. Clara batted the gathering tears away from her eyes, took a breath, and made her way to the servants' staircase. Brushing at the lingering soot on her apron, she tried to prepare herself for the meeting with the housekeeper. How would she defend herself? What would she do, and where would she go if she was dismissed? The mere thought sent her nerves into a frenzy. Mrs. Finch was seated at the desk in the large room allotted to her as both living and working quarters. Some evenings, various servants would be invited to take tea with her in this room. Clara had not yet enjoyed that honour. The housekeeper looked up, her gaze settling on Clara in the doorway. "Come in." Clara obeyed and came to stand in front of the desk. "Have a seat," the housekeeper said, her voice colourless. Clara sat in the wicker chair opposite her and waited as the housekeeper scribbled a few more words on the page in front of her, replaced the quill in the inkstand, and sat back to look at Clara. "Your work here at Rushlake has been satisfactory, Clara. Indeed, if circumstances were different, I would be quite happy to keep you on, for you are thorough and quick in your tasks. However," Clara kept her gaze on the housekeeper, refusing to allow herself the luxury of showing any emotion. "Strict rules govern our conduct at Rushlake, particularly our conduct as it relates to His Grace." Her gaze grew more intense and condemnatory, her lips thin with displeasure. "I cannot have those under my stewardship crossing, nay, leaping, over the lines of proper decorum." "Mrs. Finch," Clara said, "there has been a great misunderstanding." The housekeeper put up a hand, silencing her. "I have no desire to know the particulars of your connection," she said the word with distaste, "to the Duke. As those employed by the Duke of Rockwood, it is our task, first and foremost, to seek his good. For his successes are our successes. His failures, our failures. Do you want what is best for His Grace, Clara?" "Yes," Clara responded, entirely earnest. She also wanted what was best for herself. She couldn't imagine she would find a situation better than upper housemaid at a ducal estate. "If that is true," Mrs. Finch said, regarding her intently, "you will not remain under this roof." Clara swallowed. "You are dismissing me." "No, you would be leaving of your own volition." Clara stared, waiting for her to expound. It certainly felt as though she was being dismissed. "The Duke has shown himself reluctant to dismiss you, and I will not cross him. But I encourage you in the strongest terms of which I am capable to leave his service immediately." Clara's heart thumped and her mind whirred. No one wanted her at Rushlake. For the past 2 weeks, she had convinced herself that the Duke, at least, did, but the conversation she had overheard proved otherwise. He was keeping her here out of pity. How could she stay somewhere she was so unwanted, so despised? Mrs. Finch watched her carefully. "Because of your satisfactory work, I am prepared to provide you with a reference, so that you may seek employment elsewhere." Clara's gaze flew to hers. "However," the housekeeper continued, "I absolutely insist that you leave all thought, any thought at all, you understand, of carrying on with a future master in the way you have done here. Do I make myself clear?" Clara's cheeks flamed. I have not done anything untoward with the Duke, or with any master, Mrs. Finch. Indeed, it was her refusal to do so which had led to her dismissal from the service of Lady Redgrave. If what I observed in the Duke's bedchamber today does not strike you as untoward, Clara, we have a serious problem. Clara clenched her jaw to keep her mouth shut. She could defend herself and say it was the Duke who had asked her for her wrist, but her conscience balked at casting the blame upon him. The blood in her veins thrummed at the memory of his touch, but it was not his fault she had reacted to it. He had been thinking of his mother. Can I trust you to behave yourself with decorum wherever you find work? Yes, Clara said firmly. With the reference Mrs. Finch promised, she could leave Rushlake. But she needed more than that. She required money. I will leave Rushlake, but in return, I ask that you give me wages for the short time I have been here. Mrs. Finch nodded. What I am asking you to do is not easy, so I will do more than that. She opened one of the drawers of her weathered desk and took out a coin purse. From it, she extracted 3 coins and held them on her outstretched palm. Clara stared at the 3 gold sovereigns and glanced up at the housekeeper. Those coins were just over a quarter of her annual wages, for just 2 weeks of work. It was either a testament to Mrs. Finch's generosity, or evidence of how desperate she was for Clara to leave. Either way, Clara was grateful for it. Along with the reference, it would make all the difference. And yet, as she waited for Mrs. Finch to write the reference, her heart felt heavy at the thought of leaving. By the time Clara had finished her evening duties and was ready to leave, dark was falling. Mrs. Finch had assured her the mail coach passed by the nearest inn at 10:30, which meant Clara should arrive in plenty of time. It would be a long night and an early morning when the coach arrived in London. She had decided upon London as her destination, for it seemed most full of opportunity. With the small sack of belongings she had acquired in the past 2 weeks hanging over her arm, Clara descended the servants' stairs from the top floor. She slowed as she reached the landing for the main floor. It looked toward the principal corridor, with its long, thick rugs, tall windows, and high, plastered ceilings. The sight brought a lump to her throat. Rushlake was beautiful. She wished she could say goodbye to the Duke, but it was an absurd thought. What would such a thing accomplish? Part of her was undoubtedly hoping he would ask her to stay. Her, a housemaid. The presumption was unprecedented and would only confirm what Mrs. Finch had said. She had no sense of proper decorum. She did not belong there. One last walk down the corridor would have to suffice. There were a few candles still lit, signifying the Duke had not yet gone to bed for the evening. The door to the study stood halfway ajar, candlelight pouring from it. Clara stopped just shy of it and peeked inside. The Duke was there, seated at the desk, one hand supporting his head as he read over the paper in front of him. She felt a tug pulling her toward him, urging her into the room. It was the tug of kinship, the desire for friendship. But she was neither friend nor kin of the Duke of Rockwood. They occupied different worlds, maid and Duke, servant and master. As Mrs. Finch had said, if Clara wished to truly serve him, all that was required of her was to leave him be. "Goodbye," she whispered. Then she turned and walked back to the servants' staircase. She hadn't bothered to warn the other maids she was leaving. Mrs. Finch would tell them, and just as assuredly, they would fabricate fantastical stories to explain her sudden departure. She walked toward the servants' staircase, but stopped short, just shy of the landing, as a strange sound met her ears. Keeping still, she listened. The scraping sound repeated, and she followed it. It grew louder as she came to the short, dark wing where the billiard and gun room were. A figure moved outside one of the windows, and she doubled back with a quick intake of breath. From the shadows, Clara watched as the figure reached for one of the sash windows and tried to open it. It was locked, however, and after trying to force the latch in vain, he moved on to the next window, located in the billiard room. He was trying to force his way into Rushlake. Heart beating frantically, Clara considered her options. If she confronted the man, there was a high probability she would be treated to violence for her pains. A person desperate enough to break into the estate of Duke was unlikely to listen to reason, but she had to do something. The housekeeper and butler had retired for the night. Rousing them would take precious time. Instead, Clara turned, picked up her skirts, and ran toward the study, her hands trembling with anxious energy. The Duke's head whipped up at the sound of her entrance. "Your Grace," she said breathlessly. He rose to his feet, his gaze alert and curious. "What is it?" "Someone is attempting to break in." His brows snapped together. "What do you mean?" "I saw him myself, outside, trying to force the windows open." The Duke turned and strode toward a small shelf of books nearby, pulling one from the middle shelf. Letting it lie flat on one palm, he opened the cover. There were no pages within, however, and he pulled a pistol from the void left by them. Setting the book aside, he strode toward Clara. "Show me." Clara led the way down the corridor, staying just in front of the Duke. "I last saw him trying the window in the billiard room, Your Grace. So far, all the windows have been locked, but I imagine it is only a matter of time until—" The Duke nodded, his gaze fixed ahead. When they had passed out of the candle-lit corridor and entered the dark of the small wing beyond, the Duke put out a hand, his fingers wrapping around Clara's arm and holding her back. She halted, her eyes adjusting slowly to the dark. He put a finger to his lips, and they waited, ears straining. Then it came. A creaking and the distinctive sound of a window sliding in the casement. The Duke held up the pistol before him, then put a hand on Clara's shoulder to keep her in place, while he slipped in front of her. Clara's heartbeat galloped, and she considered whether the intruder might have a pistol of his own. What would she do if the Duke was shot because she had chosen to alert him rather than the butler or one of the footmen? Surely her quick thinking seemed foolish and irresponsible. The Duke let his hand drop from her shoulder, and she grasped it. His head turned toward her, his eyes questioning. "Be careful, Your Grace," she pled in a whisper. His gaze held hers for a moment, then he nodded and continued his soft steps toward the gunroom. Clara kept just behind him, every nerve in her body alert, every hair on end as the sound of the thief's movements grew louder. The slow sliding of the window told her he was shutting it as they crept along the wall toward the gunroom door, which was open. The Duke stopped just shy of it, and their arms pressed against each other. He looked at her, nodded, then slid into the doorway. "Stop!" he called out, pointing the gun ahead. Clara came to stand behind him and watched as the man, his back turned toward them, lowered a sack to the floor and put up his hands. "Do not even consider reaching for one of the guns," the Duke said. "They are all unloaded, but I assure you, the pistol in my hand is not, and I will put a bullet in your head if you so much as move a finger." "Is this to be my welcome, then?" the man asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. "A pistol pointed at my head?" Though his coat and breeches were dirty and worn, and his boots caked with mud, his accent was far from the one Clara had expected. It spoke of someone gently bred, and evidently finding humour in the situation. Clara glanced at the Duke to see whether he was as confused as she, but he was entirely still, his eyes unblinking. Hands still raised in surrender, the intruder's head turned enough to offer a view of his profile. The gleam of his smile, surrounded by thick facial hair, was nearly all Clara could see in the darkness that enveloped the room. The Duke's pistol slowly lowered, and his shoulders relaxed. Disbelief was etched in every line of his face. "You know this man?" Clara asked. The Duke stared ahead, his expression slack with shock. It was a moment before he responded. "He is my brother." Chapter 9. William. "You're not going to shoot me, then?" Silas asked. William hardly recognized his younger brother under all the hair and dirt. He took a few steps forward for a closer look as Silas turned to face him. It truly was him. William let out a breath of disbelief, then pulled his brother into his arms. Silas returned the embrace heartily, and William's throat grew thick. The last time William had seen Silas, they had argued heatedly. They had never seen eye to eye on matters, and William was convinced Silas's endeavours in the merchant world were not only unsound, but bringing shame to the York name. He had said and believed things he had lived to regret. Just 2 nights later, Silas had disappeared, fleeing to France to avoid the murder charge brought against him. Nearly a year ago, William had discovered his brother's innocence. Silas had been framed by the very man charging him, Lord Drayton. "You smell awful," William said, unable to stop from grinning like a relieved fool. "And you smell like a dandy." Silas pulled back to look at him, one hand on either shoulder. It was still too dark for proper surveil, but even in the dark, William could see evidence of the last 2 years. A full beard could not hide the thinness of Silas's face, or the dark circles beneath his eyes. It was not the face of a man who had been enjoying himself at parties and routs in Paris. It was the face of a man who had been scraping by. And now he was here, in England, in William's house. "What are you doing here?" William's surprise and elation gave way to concern as he let go of his brother's shoulders and set the pistol down on the nearest shelf. Silas's gaze flitted to something behind William, and William turned. Clara watched them in silent astonishment. William had forgotten she was there, but he went over to her. "Clara, I need you to listen to me carefully. First, you must fetch a candle as quickly as possible." She nodded swiftly. "Then I ask you to stand guard outside this door until I tell you otherwise. No one must be allowed to enter. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Grace." "Do your best not to be seen." With another nod, she turned and left the room, closing the door softly behind her. William turned to Silas. "You should not be here, Silas. It is dangerous. What possessed you to come?" "Is it not obvious?" Silas lifted his shoulders. "You are the Duke of Rockwood now, brother. Your power and influence is nearly unmatched." William scrubbed a hand over the lower half of his face and shook his head. "I wish that were the case, but it simply isn't." Silas let out an incredulous breath. "What do you mean?" "You hold the highest non-royal title in England, higher than Drayton even." "I do, but it is not enough. Surely you can see that. Drayton's title has been in his family for generations." "As has yours." "Not through our line. People look at me as they look at nabobs, Silas. They see the dukedom as ill-gotten. To them, I am but an opportunist, and an unqualified one at that. I may have a title, but I have no influence at all in the House of Lords. Not yet, at least." Silas's gaze searched William's, his expression becoming more crestfallen with every word. "Believe me," William said, "if I had the power or the influence, I would have used it on your behalf already. I intend to acquire both, but that requires time. You cannot remain here." Silas's jaw clenched. "I cannot go back. I refuse to return to the hell I was living in." "Is France not better than the gallows?" "If Drayton discovers you have returned, he will come after you, Silas. There is no question about that. Because he fears the truth of his crimes will come out." "Precisely. and he has a great deal to lose if that happens. It is what makes him so dangerous. He cannot know you have stepped foot on English soil again." "He need not know it," William scoffed. "And how will you keep it from him?" "I will stay here." William shook his head. "It is impossible. I can tell you from recent and personal experience that news travels quickly, Silas. Servant gossip does not remain amongst only servants. I have dozens here, and none of them would I trust to keep your presence a secret." Silas strode over to him and gripped him by the shoulders, an almost mad light in his eyes. "Did you hear me? I cannot go back." "Why not? It is only temporary." Silas shook his head. "You think Drayton has no connections in Paris. I lived in fear of being discovered and very nearly was more than once. I was obliged to pay for secrecy from those who housed me, 2 of whom took my money and divulged my whereabouts despite it. I will live in a cave and forage for food rather than return to France. Do you understand?" William searched his brother's gaunt face. Until a year ago, it had only been their brother Anthony with whom Silas had been corresponding. William had since read those letters, however, and they had all insisted things were well in France. Silas must have been protecting Anthony's conscience by claiming such a thing, for in his brother's eyes, William saw the spectre of what Silas had experienced but was not verbalizing. There was an almost indistinguishable knock on the door. A burst of panic shot through William's chest, and he put a finger to his lips until Silas nodded. William went to the door, trying to decide what he would do if it was Edmund or the butler, Mr. Thurston. He opened it a crack, and Clara's face, illuminated by the single candle she held, stared back at him, her large blue eyes alert. He sighed in relief. He had never seen such a welcome sight. "Were you seen?" He took the candle from her. She shook her head. "The house is quiet, but I will stand guard." "Thank you," he said fervently. "If anyone comes—" "You needn't fear, Your Grace. I will manage it." She offered a reassuring smile. He nodded, confident she would manage, and she shut the door softly. "Will she tell?" Silas asked. "No," William said, setting the candle on the nearby cabinet, above which hung 3 different hunting rifles. "We can trust her." "So you do have a servant you can trust?" William's gaze flicked to his brother, and their eyes held. Silas was right. William had one servant he trusted, but she was one amongst dozens. "Is there not a place in this enormous house that I can hide? A priest hole?" "The house was built in 1790, not 15—" He stopped, his mind going to the hunting lodge. It was a 15-minute walk from the main house, and William had been there but once on his initial tour of Rushlake's grounds. "There is, then," Silas said, watching him closely. William shook his head. "You would be as good as a prisoner, Silas. You could not come out, unless perhaps in the middle of the night. How would you eat or drink?" "With the help of your trusted maid," Silas said, as though it was the most obvious thing in the world. William ran a hand through his hair. "You cannot be in earnest." "I assure you, I have never been more so." "To what end, though? You intend to live the rest of your life hidden away?" "Of course not. I need time to build a case against Drayton, and for you to increase your influence." "And how do you mean to make such a case when you are confined day in and day out?" "Through correspondence, for one," he said, "and, at need, through nighttime ventures." William shook his head, pacing the floor. "It is too dangerous." Silas's life was the most important thing in the balance, but it was not the only thing. If he was caught, William could bid farewell to any chance of making headway with his reputation amongst his peers. Such a scandal would set him back years, and Frederick's hopes of gaining a seat in the House of Commons The thing he had been working toward for so many years would be put in grave peril. Silas stepped in front of William, forcing him to stop his pacing. "Please, brother." William stared back at him. Silas had always been the most intrepid of the York brothers. It was what had so frustrated William about him. He waved away anything that stood in his way, whether it be tradition or his family's reputation. He had fierce passions and dreams, and a temper when crossed, but here he was, begging. Could William and Clara truly do what Silas was asking, though? Could they keep his brother hidden at Rushlake with dozens of servants carrying out duties all around the grounds? It would require a great deal of both Clara and himself. But how could he say no? He had hurt Silas deeply by believing him guilty of a murder he hadn't committed. It was a difficult wrong to right. What was his alternative? He would be in danger anywhere in England. Rushlake was likely the safest place. "Very well," William said resolutely. No sooner had the words left his mouth than he was pulled into an embrace. "Thank you," Silas said into William's shoulder. "Do not thank me yet," William said. "It will only be possible if Clara agrees." "Shall I ask her?" "No, you stay here." Silas nodded, and William strode to the door and opened it. Clara's head whipped around from her place beside the door, her back against the wall. A flash of metal in her palm was quickly snuffed as she closed her fingers around it and stepped out to face him. "Is everything well, Your Grace?" "Yes." William closed the door behind him and turned to look at her. Silas's life was in this maid's hands. "Thank you, Clara, for all your help." "Of course," she said quickly, dropping her gaze. "Forgive me, but do you happen to know the time?" William took the pocket watch from the inner pocket of his tailcoat. "A few minutes before 10. Her eyes widened, and she stooped to pick up a small cloth sack on the floor. "I must go." His gaze fixed on the sack she grasped between her hands, then flicked to her face as comprehension dawned. She was not retiring to bed. She was leaving. Chapter 10. Clara. "Go where?" the Duke asked. Clara met his gaze for a moment, and regret filtered through her. But she had no time for regret. She would have to be quick if she was to catch the mail coach. "I'm going away." She tore her eyes away from him and turned, only to stop once more. She clasped the coin in her palm for a moment, then looked down at it. This coin was the price the Duke had paid for her. She needed it sorely, but she also hated it, for it represented the abyss that lay between them and the small, almost valueless place she occupied in the world. She shifted to face him, and his brown eyes were full of confusion. Heart throbbing, she reached for his hand and brought it between them. It was an unforgivable presumption and intimacy, but she hadn't the heart to care. She was leaving. She transferred the guinea to his hand and pressed his fingers around it. "Thank you for what you did for me. Goodbye, Your Grace." She turned to leave, but the Duke's hand grasped hers. "Wait, Clara." She shut her eyes, wishing that her name on his lips did not make her feel the things she felt. "Why are you leaving?" She remained silent, torn between a desire to tell him and a fear of what would happen if she did. All the while, his hand held hers, keeping her where she was. She wanted to return its pressure, but she left her hand limp in his. "Is it because of what happened earlier?" he asked. "That was entirely my fault, Clara, and I assure you, it will not happen again." "I was not thinking." She shut her eyes. She wanted it to happen again. She craved being near him, which was why she needed to leave. "Please, do not go." She finally turned toward him, needing to see his face, to understand why it mattered in the least to him whether she was at Rushlake or Bedlam. She let her eyes drop and pulled her hand gently away, trying for a smile. "I do not belong here, Your Grace. You and I both know that." There was a short silence. "Do you mean to return to your husband?" Clara's gaze jumped to his. "What? No." She searched his face, trying to understand why he would ask her such a thing. Did he believe her to be nursing a broken heart? "I married John out of desperation, Your Grace, too quickly to comprehend the habits that consumed him. We were married but a few short weeks." His brow knit. "Then where are you going?" "To seek employment elsewhere." "Have you been unhappy at Rushlake?" "No, but I have made everyone else so. My presence here has made things worse for you in particular, and that is not at all what I want. It will be easier this way." She had little hope she would reach the village in time for the mail coach tonight, which would mean waiting until tomorrow. Would Mrs. Finch be upset if she slept at Rushlake and left in the morning? Clara did not wish to spend her precious money on lodgings for the night. The door opened, and Silas's head appeared. "Forgive me," he said upon seeing them, and the door closed again. The Duke's eyes lingered on it for a moment before he turned back to her. "It is true that the gossip surrounding what happened at the market that day has been aggravating. I have been concerned on your behalf, for you have not received the treatment I had hoped for from the other servants. And, to be frank, a few hours ago I might have even agreed with your decision to leave, but everything has changed now." "What do you mean?" "Silas," the Duke said, "tonight is the first time I have seen my brother in nearly 2 years. His arrival is entirely unexpected and completely foolhardy. There is not sufficient time to acquaint you with the particulars of his situation at the moment, but suffice it to say, no one must know he is here, not a soul apart from you and myself. Do you understand?" She nodded, but 100 questions filled her mind. "I need you, Clara. I need you at Rushlake." She swallowed, thrusting away her heart's determination to make more of his words than he meant. "Silas is set upon remaining in England, and I have agreed to keep him here on the condition that he remain hidden. Such a feat will require your help and a fair amount of strategy between the three of us." Clara listened intently, trying to wrap her mind around what precisely he was asking of her. "Are you familiar with the hunting lodge on Rushlake's grounds?" he asked. "I have heard it spoken of, Your Grace." "Silas will remain there. It would be your task to ensure he has food and drink, and that he can stretch his legs once or twice a day without being seen." He looked at her intently. "It is a great deal to ask of you, I know, but you will receive ample compensation for your trouble. I will double your wages." Clara's heart leapt to her throat. Double? That was as much as she had earned as Lady Redgrave's personal maid. She had resigned herself to the fact she would not find a position as good as this one at Rushlake, but now that the Duke was offering to double her wages, it was unthinkable she would find a comparable situation elsewhere. "What do you say?" he asked. "Will you remain?" Her eyes searched his, but her mind was rehashing her conversation with Mrs. Finch. The housekeeper had insisted Clara was harming the Duke by being at Rushlake. What would she say now if she knew he insisted he needed Clara? She dropped her gaze and shut her eyes. Looking at the Duke made it impossible to think rationally. Simply looking into his eyes, she was nearly certain she would have agreed to stay without any salary at all. But he was not asking that of her. He was offering her a generous wage, comfortable lodgings, and an opportunity to repay him for his kindness to her. How could she refuse? "It is a serious thing I am asking of you," he said. "My brother's very life and my own reputation hang in the balance. There are few people I feel I can trust." "I understand, Your Grace." An eagerness to prove herself filtered through her. She would have to rein in her heart, though, and do better to maintain the proper distance dictated by their respective positions. She would prove Mrs. Finch wrong, I will stay. Clara. Yes, Your Grace. I am entrusting you with the greatest secret I possess. If I am to do so, I need you to look me in the eye, something so few seem willing to do these days. She brought her head up until their gazes met. His warm brown eyes met hers, full of the weight of his burden, a burden he was asking her to share with him. He searched her eyes for seconds that felt like minutes. What did he see? Could he tell just by looking at her why she had been dismissed by her last master? Could he see the affection in which she held him? Finally, he gave a nod. I ask you to always look me in the eye when we speak. This is simply too precarious a situation for us not to be entirely honest with one another. Can I trust you to speak the truth to me? How would she manage to keep her eyes on his and her heart in its place when the mere sight of him made hers race? She would have to find a way. You may depend upon me, Your Grace. Thank you. He glanced behind him at the door to the gun room. We should decide upon a plan with him. Certainly, Your Grace. Just as urgently, she would need a plan of her own to keep her heart safe. Chapter 11. William. William opened the door and let Clara pass through to where Silas stood, inspecting one of the rifles that hung on the wall. He could hardly believe he was truly looking at his brother, different as Silas now appeared. Neither did he find it easy to believe that Silas had chosen to come and stay with him rather than Anthony or Frederick. The relationship between William and Silas had always been the most strained amongst the York brothers. But William knew why Silas had come to him. William was his hope for salvation. Silas turned at their entrance, an anxious look entering his eyes, as though he was nervous to hear the result of William and Clara's discussion. It was a foreign expression for a man who had always been carefree and even thoughtless. It spoke just as strongly, as did his dishevelled appearance, of the changes the past 2 years had wrought upon him. Silas, William said, allow me to introduce you to Clara Quinn. We took her on about a fortnight ago as an upper housemaid, but she has kindly agreed to the task of looking after you. Silas let out a small breath of relief, and his mouth stretched into a smile. I am pleased to make your acquaintance, Clara. He gave a little bow. And I yours, Mr. York, she said politely, curtsying in return. I'm sorry you have been roped into this, Silas said, but I assure you, my gratitude to you knows no bounds. He reached for her hand and pressed a kiss upon the back of it. Clara's cheeks flushed, and a hint of annoyance flashed through William. Silas had always been the most charming of the brothers, flirtatious even. Frederick, with his charisma and ability to talk persuasively, came next. Anthony's tendency to brood, coupled with his quick wit, had always made him a subject of interest amongst the fairer sex. And then there was William, more starched up than a gentleman's Sabbath cravat, was how Silas had once described him. The hunting lodge seems to be the most logical answer to the question of where to keep you, William said. Though, Clara, I fear that means you will be obliged to make more than one visit there each day to ensure Silas has food, drink, and a chance to stretch his legs in the fresh air. May as well fit me with leading strings, Silas said with a half-smile. It is certainly not out of the question if you give us reason to think it necessary, William retorted. He turned his attention back to Clara. The lodge is a 15-minute walk from the main house. It is no trouble, Your Grace, she said. I enjoy walking. He smiled slightly. I remember you saying that. But unfortunately, it will be a fair amount of trouble. We require an excuse to offer Mrs. Finch for your absences, and though we have such an excuse in the way of the multitude of guests we will be welcoming— Guests? Silas exclaimed, his eyes brightening. Guests from whom you will keep your distance, obviously. He stared meaningfully at Silas. "Right, of course. If you had come last night," William said, "I would have been able to stop Edmund from sending the invitations. But as they were sent earlier today, it is out of our hands now. Assuming we receive positive responses from most of the people invited, which Edmund assures me we shall, we will need the lodge to accommodate some of them. Clara, you will make your visits under the guise of preparing the lodge for visitors." She nodded. "The difficulty will arise once those visitors arrive. Keeping Silas's presence there a secret will require a great deal of strategy and care." "Your Grace," Clara said, "I have just been thinking what the result might be when the other servants discover I have been chosen for this task. It may precipitate more gossip." "Gossip?" Silas frowned. "Why?" William glanced at Clara, who met his gaze for a moment before averting hers. Now was not the time to lay her history, or theirs, bare. He had no desire to embarrass her in front of Silas by recounting the events at the market square. Neither was he anxious for Silas's inevitable questions, for he would not accept William buying a woman at auction without a number of them. "We can discuss that later. I think, Clara, that we can take measures to dampen any undue curiosity. It is late, though, and our first priority must be getting Silas to the lodge. Along with some food," Silas added. "I'm famished." "You look famished," William replied with a grimace. "Will you quietly retrieve bed linens and some food from the kitchens, Clara? Enough for the morning, too, if you can manage it. Meet us outside the servant door in a few minutes, and we will make our way to the lodge together." Clara left the brothers alone and did as instructed. There was silence until the door had closed and her soft footsteps had retreated. William felt Silas's gaze on him and avoided it as long as he was able. But eventually, there was nothing for it but to look at him. "What?" Silas smiled slightly, but it had a knowing tilt. "Nothing. She seems very capable." There was a pause. "And beautiful?" William let out a sound of annoyance and strode to the table, shifting the candlestick slightly, and very needlessly. "Do you deny it?" Silas asked. "Of course she is capable. And beautiful. And beautiful," William conceded reluctantly. Silas's smile grew. "Who would have thought? My stiff as a poker Duke of a brother cavorting with one of the maids." "Enough," William said. "There has been no cavorting." "Really? Really?" The corners of Silas's mouth turned down. "Then you won't mind if I most certainly will mind." The words came out more harshly than was merited, and William ignored the pointed way Silas looked at him. He took in a measured breath. "This is not a game, Silas. Your life is in her hands." Silas grew more serious. "I understand, and I am indebted to both of you. Save your gratitude until we have proven we can keep you safe. I have no doubts at all on that score, just as I have no doubts you will manage to clear my name." "Silas," William said with a deep frown, "you must manage your expectations. I may have the title of a duke, but I have none of the influence with which you associate it. Not yet, but you will. That is inevitable. If only that were true. And you will bide your time until then?" "I will bide my time." Silas motioned for them to proceed to the rendezvous point, and William hesitated for a moment, then opened the door carefully and looked down the corridor to verify they were alone. But his mind was on his brother's words. "I will bide my time." Silas had never been particularly patient. Staying cooped up in a hunting lodge went against his nature. He had always taken his liberty and ability to choose for himself seriously. It had driven William mad in the past. But he was different now, that much was clear. William would have to hope the changes in his brother included a greater ability to stay in the background and twiddle his thumbs for an undetermined amount of time. Heaven only knew when William would have the influence necessary to sway public opinion and the opinion of his fellow peers in Silas's favour, and against Lord Drayton. Laden with bed linens and a basket of food, William couldn't imagine how she was balancing. Clara appeared outside the servant door just after them. Silas took the basket from her arm, a gesture that appeared less chivalrous once he reached amongst the food within and began eating a loaf of bread like a savage. Clara smiled furtively at William, who relieved her of half of the linens in her arms. The path that led to the hunting lodge was dark, and carrying a lantern too dangerous, but the path was clear and well maintained, leading William to be grateful for the second time that he employed an army of gardeners. Between hearty bites of bread, Silas regaled them with his journey to England on a small fishing boat 3 nights ago. His safe and secret passage had been granted in exchange for helping the crew, who had been short 1 member. He had done such a fine job that the captain had offered him a position. Silas had declined, and the captain had given him a few coins from pure gratitude, which had been enough to pay for the mail coach to the village nearest Rushlake. They finally reached the hunting lodge, where they were obliged to climb through a window, as William had forgotten to bring the key. Clara, on the other hand, had had the forethought to bring supplies for lighting a candle, something William allowed on the condition that the shutters remain closed. He also insisted on helping Clara make up Silas's bed, until it became apparent that he was hindering rather than helping, something she was too kind to tell him. This was a task she could perform in her sleep, and he watched with a bit of wonder at her skill. Making up a bed was not meant to be in a duke's repertoire, of course. It was too far below him. But part of William felt it was something he should be capable of, whether or not he was called upon to do it. In many ways, the higher the pedestal people placed him upon, the more inept he felt. Clara stepped back from the maid bed and put her hands on her hips as she looked around the room. That is done, but the room is hardly satisfactory. I should have brought something to dust with. You must be joking, Silas said, running a hand along the linens. This is far and beyond any bed I have slept on in recent memory. I shall sleep like a baby. With less crying, I hope. William strode toward his brother and pulled him into another embrace. It is good to have you home. Liar, Silas said, though his voice broke on the word, his grip on William tightening. You are wishing me at Jericho. Yes, William said, his own eyes moist as he pulled back. But once you have bathed, that may well change. Silas smiled, then turned to Clara. He is beastly, is he not? How do you bear being employed by such a brute? The money, sir, Clara replied without missing a beat. William's brows shot up, and both he and Silas laughed aloud, caught off guard by her answer. Forgive me, she hurried to say. It was wrong of me to... No, Silas said. It was the perfect answer, Clara. My brother needs nothing more than a large dose of humility. Clara's cheeks stained red. William grinned, hoping it would reassure her he had not taken offence at her joke. Assuming it was indeed a joke. As long as my need for humility never surpasses your current need for a bath, I will be content. They bid Silas farewell, and William assisted Clara through the window. Silas shut it as silently as possible behind them. Now, nothing but a dark figure through the warped pane, he waved at them merrily as they walked away. But soon the curtains shut, and William and Clara were alone on the dark, dirt path to the main house. The path had been more than enough for the 3 of them to walk abreast on the way to the hunting lodge, but now that it was just William and Clara, there was a wide berth between them. Clara's feet skirted the very edge of the path. An eventful evening for you, he said, hands clasped behind his back. Yes, Your Grace, but not more so than for you. William smiled ruefully. It has certainly been unexpected. You must have 100 questions. It is not my place to ask them. He glanced at her, wishing there was more light so he could see her profile clearly. We promised one another the truth, did we not? She met his gaze, enough surprise in it that he was certain she had not expected him to offer her the truth. As the person on whose care Silas will most rely, he said, you deserve to know the reason you have been asked to guard his secrets and mine. He took in a breath before beginning. Silas and I have frequently found ourselves at loggerheads. He is too free, I suppose, and I too rigid, as he mentioned. I have always felt it my duty to protect the family name and legacy, while he has been impatient with my demands. He frowned. In his pursuit to make his way in the world, he and my brother Anthony connected with two other men, Lord Drayton and Thomas Langdon. Together they ventured into the world of merchant shipping. After some time it became clear to Silas that something was amiss with the finances. He was fiercely upset over it. Langdon was the one handling the accounts for the company, so Silas's suspicions naturally fell upon him. But after talking with Langdon, it became clear Drayton was undercutting them. I was unaware of that particular development, he said grimly. When Silas and Langdon went to confront Drayton, Drayton shot Langdon, killing him. He blamed Silas, who Drayton also claimed was the one falsifying accounts. Given Drayton's influence, Silas was obliged to flee to France to avoid the gallows. Good heavens, Clara whispered. How terrible. And yet that is not the most terrible part. His frown deepened. I believed Drayton. I knew how upset Silas had been, and he has always been impulsive. I believed my own brother capable of murder. I knew how angry he was about the accounts, and, fool that I was, I looked up to Drayton because of his position. But Silas was guilty of nothing. I, on the other hand, am guilty of the worst sort of betrayal. Silence followed his admission. The only sound, their soft footsteps, and the chirping of crickets in the nearby undergrowth. The quiet pierced him, but he suppressed the desire to look at Clara, to attempt to divine her thoughts. What must you think of me? He said. No differently than I did before, Your Grace. He chuckled ruefully. Heaven only knows what that was. There was a short pause. What weight can my opinion possibly carry with you? She was right, of course. Her opinion should matter not at all. But he found that it did, and the fact that she had not countered him by offering any evidence that her opinion of him had been good, it sat ill with him, like a shirt of itchy wool. They reached the servant door, and he turned to face her, trying to banish the unhappy thoughts. Silas was here. He was safe. That was what mattered. Thank you for your help, Clara. It is my pleasure, Your Grace. He gave a soft chuckle. That may be taking it a bit too far, don't you think? She smiled back but said nothing, lowering her eyes as she was wont to do. You may rest as long as needed in the morning, he said. I will ensure Mrs. Finch knows as much, and will have her acquainted with your new duties. At the rate Silas was eating, though, he will already have made it through the sustenance you brought. Clara smiled and met his gaze. I will ensure he does not go without, and that he has a bath. He chuckled, but the mere thought of her assisting Silas in such a task had William replying, He can wash in the stream. Clara smiled slightly, and the expression sent a flurry of something unfamiliar through his veins. As you wish, Your Grace. William felt a rush of gratitude that he was not obliged to shoulder this burden alone. Had it not been for Clara's trustworthiness and willingness to help, the urge to smile would have been the farthest thing possible from him at the moment. Rest well, Clara. He turned away and walked toward Rushlake's main door. It's not only the money, she said suddenly. He stopped, then turned to face her. The reason I am still here, she explained. William searched her face, trying to understand what precisely she was saying to him. From the intent look in her eyes, it was clear she felt it important to communicate. "You asked for my honesty always," she said after a few moments. "Did you truly mean it?" "I did." She met his gaze, and his heart fluttered with anticipation and apprehension as he waited. "I think you are too severe with yourself when it comes to your brother's situation, Your Grace. In fact, I suspect you are too severe with yourself in general." A lump rose in his throat, and he forced it down. His guilt over Silas had been weighing on him for a year now. Perhaps if he had been less dismissive of Silas, things might have turned out differently. Langdon might still be alive, and Silas would never have been obliged to flee England. "I hope you know," Clara continued, "that you may always be honest with me without fear I shall think less of you. Good night, Your Grace." She turned and walked to the door, passing through it with a quick glance over her shoulder that kept William in place for a full minute afterward. First thing in the morning, William met with Edmund in the library. He had lain awake longer than he had hoped, trying to decide how to handle things with his friend and advisor. He disliked the idea of keeping Silas's return from Edmund. But Edmund would insist William sent Silas elsewhere, and that was something William could not do. He had betrayed his brother once. He would not do so again. The unpleasant fact, however, was that they were harbouring a fugitive from the law at Rushlake. The gossip that had circulated about William and Clara was a prime example of the danger they faced. If Lord Drayton discovered Silas was in England again, he would take immediate action to see he was silenced for good. Anyone who knew of Silas's presence at Rushlake would be considered complicit. William had no intention of putting Edmund in that position. The less he knew, the better. "Poor night of sleep, Your Grace?" Edmund searched William's face as he took the seat across from him. "Simply tell me I look like a monster and be done with it, Edmund." "Not at all. I have been worrying I rushed you into things, inviting everyone to Rushlake, and that you are losing sleep over it." William shook his head. "It is what I want, but it shall be upon us before we know it. And if you are correct about the number of acceptances we will receive, we will require the bedrooms in the hunting lodge, which has not been in use for some time." Edmund nodded. "I will make a visit and do an inventory today." "That is unnecessary. One of the maids can manage that task. In fact, I was thinking that, to minimize the chaos amongst the servants, it might be wise to assign one of them to take on the preparation of the lodge." Edmund's gaze grew more pensive, and under the sustained scrutiny, William found himself unable to suggest Clara as the one to assign the task to. Just as Clara had said, it would feel too pointed after everything. But what was the alternative? It had to be Clara. If anyone else was suggested, William would have to put his foot down, and that would raise suspicion Silas could not afford. "I believe you are right," Edmund said. "Given the gossip that continues to plague the servants, I wonder if the best choice might be Clara." William opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. Edmund scooted to the edge of his seat. "You may dislike the idea, Your Grace, but I do believe it would be best." William tried to keep his response measured, instead of jumping to agree with the suggestion. "And why is that?" "Creating distance between the two of you may help quell more gossip. The last thing we need when the guests arrive is for their own servants to become participants in a rumour mill that will inevitably reach their masters." William nodded, but his conscience twinged. Edmund was trying to help him, while William concealed the truth. Not just the truth about Silas, but that William would be working together more closely than ever with Clara. Neither was it as though Edmund's concerns were without merit. William did feel a connection to Clara. Whether that was due to the circumstances of their meeting, or for the mere fact that such a connection was forbidden, William couldn't say. But last night had given him to suspect Clara felt it too.